Dear Game Freak, hi, it's me, Austin. What's up? You still haven't written back to me about your Pokeballs. That's okay, I understand. You want to suppress the truth about the systematic genocide of an entire species. I probably would too if I were in your shoes. I wouldn't want people to know the truth about Pokeballs if I were the sole benefactor of their existence, but that's not why I'm writing to you today. I've already said all there is to say about your Pokeballs. No, actually, I'm writing to you to address something I said in my last video that, well, honestly, I didn't put that much thought into, but definitely created waves. I said that your anime was bad, and you know, in my defense, almost everything I loved to watch as a kid is not nearly as charming and has not aged well. I'm looking at you, X-Men! But you know, I noticed that the miraculous success of Pokemon Go has launched the series back into the main stage limelight, and as a result, Netflix picked the show up. So I gave it another watch, and you know what? I was wrong. If I'm being entirely honest, Pokemon is actually a pretty genuinely interesting and entertaining show, and even funny. Hell, even the Western dubbing isn't that bad. It's not, you know, great, but it's totally not terrible. At least not Sailor Moon terrible.
I am Tuxedo Mask.
Of course, watching your show again as an adult ignited my pedantic science brain, and I have a sickness. I can't stop. I can't stop myself! I was watching the show and Pikachu blew up a goddamn building 2 episodes in, so I had to ask myself, exactly how fucking strong is Pikachu? Could a Pikachu exist in our real world? I need to know! Of course, we're a video game channel and not an anime channel, so maybe this isn't the right thing to talk about. But fuck you, I can do what I want. Plus, there are surprisingly lengthy debates on the internet about whether or not Ash's Pikachu itself is particularly special, with most people generally concluding that Ash's Pikachu isn't that spectacular, other than spectacularly adorable, that is. So I think it's pretty fair to say that for the most part, in spite of Team Rocket's misplaced fascination, Ash's Pikachu is pretty emblematic of the normal capabilities of the average, or perhaps even above average, Pikachu in the Pokemon universe. At least that's the story I'm telling myself. Now let's do this! Pikachu, like Rattata, is a rodent. A mouse though, kinda. Although to be entirely honest, it looks a little bit more like a cockatiel than a mouse as far as markings go. It's one of the original 151 Pokemon, and actually is one of the earliest cool Pokemon you could get in Pokemon Red and Blue. A sparse population of Pikachu inhabit Viridian Forest, although they're incredibly rare and most people pass through the area without ever seeing one. Pikachus have pretty awesome powers, other than being adorable as fuck though. They're an electric type Pokemon and can deliver incredibly potent shock attacks into their opponents. The Pokedex entry states that they have organs in their cheeks that are capable of storing electric energy, and that if sufficient numbers of them are gathered in one place, they can actually produce goddamn lightning storms. This is bullshit, right? Well, you'll just have to wait and see. Before going into the specifics of Pikachu, let's talk about electricity and animals in our real world for a second. There are actual animals in our real world that use electricity as a weapon. I mean, you probably knew this already, but when I was a kid, I was convinced these things were a fabrication. I'm talking, of course, of electric eels. Amusingly enough, electric eels aren't actually related to eels at all. They actually belong to the knife fish family. Regardless, electric eels are fucking incredible. You see, all animals on our planet actually do produce electricity. You do, I do, my dog does. It's how our cells work to transfer energy. We do this through something called the sodium-potassium pump process, where a cell pushes 3 sodium ions to one side of a membrane and pulls 2 potassium ions into the other side. It does this over and over and over again, which creates an unbalanced charge transfer, giving the side with more potassium ions a negative charge and the one with sodium ions a positive charge. Fucking cool, right? Now, in our bodies, this charge is created and dissipated asynchronistically, oftentimes almost as soon as it's created. In either case, without this process, we wouldn't be able to flex our muscles, breathe, or even think. But while we waste our electric potential powering our oversized brains, electric eels decided to dump all their attribute points into badass, and as a result have bent this biological process to their fucking wills. Eels use this same sodium-potassium exchange to create a charge in a cell called an electrocyte. Eels flood these electrocytes with potassium and hold them there until they're ready to be used. When an eel is ready to discharge its electricity, the ion gates open, sodium floods into the electrocyte cells, and lets loose a tiny shock of 0.15 volts. Of course, that's just one cell, but an electric eel has thousands of these cells, all arranged in series and literally wired with nerve cells to a pacemaker nerve cluster that's capable of coordinating the release of all these cells simultaneously. So instead of a low voltage charge slowly pissing out of their body, an eel is capable of unleashing over 600 volts into the surrounding area, fucking murder fucking every goddamn piece of prey in the vicinity. It's an incredible feat of evolution. So an animal using the powers of science to fuck their enemies up isn't actually unheard of. So could a mammal do this? Totally. Could a Pikachu? Hell yeah, of course. Well, I mean, that's not enough, is it? Oh, a Pikachu could shock somebody. What kind of ending to a science episode is that? No! Here at the Shoddycast Labs, we won't rest until we have all the answers. And the answers are, say it with me now, God damn terrifying. So we've established that animals can shock people, but Pokemon don't just, accomplish boring everyday feats that can be easily mimicked by sticking a fork in a live outlet. No, Pokemon are effectively gods that walk among us. So just how large of a shock is Pikachu capable of delivering? A fucking massive one. Of course, in the second episode of the Pokemon anime, Pikachu blows up an entire building, but this actually appears to be due to the electricity igniting volatile gases expelled by coughing. The frames of reference are few and far apart, but there are two notable displays of power we can absolutely measure perfectly. In the episode On a Wingull and a Prayer, we see a Pikachu blow the goddamn top off a mountain, and again in the episode Unova's Survival Crisis, a Pikachu rips apart a goddamn stone temple. Jesus Christ! Okay, shit, where to start? The temple, of course. Mountains are made up of all sorts of shit. Different gradients of rock, minerals, dirt, trees, fuck all, whereas ancient temples were predominantly constructed from one material in one quarry. This temple in Pokemon mostly resembles the structures built by the ancient Maya civilization in Mexico and Central America, which were predominantly comprised of local limestone. Buried deep in the south of Mexico are the ruins of the giant Mayan city Calakmul, in which is one of the tallest surviving Mayan temples, uncreatively called Structure 2. Calakmul Structure 2 towers above all nearby landmarks at 55 meters and is constructed with a terrifyingly heavy 3 million kilograms of limestone. This is our placeholder for the Pokemon temple that's reduced to rubble by one shock from a particularly agitated Pikachu. How does electricity even render something this massive structurally unstable? Simple. Thermal shock. Thermal shock is something a substance experiences when portions of it change temperature dramatically. A good way to illustrate this while simultaneously irritating anybody you live with is to place a glass or mug in your freezer overnight, boil some water over the stove, and drop the glass into the hot water. The 0-degree glass will come into contact with water that's 100 degrees, and the surface of the glass will immediately expand while the inner portions of the glass will remain rigid. This will create internal tension within the glass, which at these high temperatures will overcome the glass's ability to maintain its shape, and it will fracture. If you heat the glass up slowly enough though, this actually won't happen because the material has time to expand and move out of the way of nearby molecules at a much less alarming rate. So, easy peasy, we just have to use electricity to heat up the stone until it fractures. Awesome! How the fuck would you do that though? I mean, electric energy is based on the flow of electrons through a medium, whereas heat is a form of quantum kinetic energy stored in molecules, a la incredibly tiny vibrations. How on earth do electrons heat something up? Resistance. You see, almost every material in the universe, aside from some very interesting and notable exceptions that aren't relevant to talk about right now, have electric resistance. For example, copper has a pretty low electric resistance compared to, rubber, which has an incredibly high electric resistance. That's why wires are frequently copper wrapped in rubber. The low resistance of copper allows electrons to move more freely, whereas the high resistance of rubber keeps the electricity contained, both for safety but also practical reasons. That being said, even substances substances with incredibly high resistance aren't completely immune to the flow of electrons. If you were to pump enough voltage through the same copper wire, eventually it would override the insulating effect of the rubber. At the end of the day, resistance is relative. Everything is capable of transporting electrons, it just depends upon how persistent the electrons happen to be. Anyway, whenever electron passes through something, the substance resists a little bit, and when this happens, the electric energy that's held back is transformed into heat energy. This is exactly how things like space heaters and electric stovetops work. Electricity is transported through substances with a high-ish electric resistance, and the electrons impart heat energy into the medium, creating heat which is used to warm the space up or cook food. In order to figure out how our Pikachu reduces a limestone temple to rubble, we need to know 4 things: the total mass of the temple, and the specific heat capacity, thermal shock parameter, and electric resistance of limestone. Not all of these things are readily available in your average textbook, but here at the Shoddycast, we stop at nothing! And thankfully, there's a very small yet detailed segment of scientists that have devoted a lot of time and energy to studying limestone. Limestone is an incredible material, actually. Limestone is a sedimentary rock, which means it's formed by various particles that have been smushed together by terrestrial pressure. Specifically, limestone is formed by the skeletal remains of ancient coral, shellfish, and other marine life. Limestone has really interesting thermal properties in that it's actually quite resistant to thermal shock and fracturing. This is because its specific makeup of calcium carbonate allows it to easily dissipate heat energy, and it's also much softer than a lot of other rock, which allows it to expand when exposed to high heats very quickly. For this reason, limestone is used in the production of steel and high-end ceramics. That being said, it's not immune to thermal shock by any means, and if you heat it up by over 800 Kelvin very quickly, it's guaranteed to fracture. Remember earlier when I said that thermal fracturing occurs when one section of a material expands from heat faster than cooler locations? This means that in order to crumble our temple, we don't actually have to heat all of it. 40% will do. Given a specific heat capacity of 0.907, this means that our Pikachu needs to impart a whopping 1.04 gigajoules of energy into this monolith almost instantly. Limestone has a resistance of 10 million ohms! Plugging in all our numbers, this means that our Pikachu is blasting this temple with the power of Zeus himself with over 14 billion volts and a current of nearly 1.5 thousand amps. This is quite literally like producing a fucking lightning bolt like a real one, which has a higher amperage but also a much lower voltage, ranging in the 1 billions. This incredibly high voltage is necessary for the current of 1000 amps to actually travel through the temple and impart its energy directly into the stone, causing it to crumble and shatter beneath the Olympian might of a fucking mouse. Keep in mind that to produce a real lightning bolt, we need fucking storm systems that extend into the goddamn stratosphere and cover miles of ground in order to build up the energy to strike the ground. And even then, this Pikachu is capable of pushing this electricity through stone, not just at it. These temples can withstand actual comparatively low voltage thunderstorms, but a fucking cartoon mouse can wreck their shit. And remember our electric eel, which produces a current using electrocyte cells and a sodium-potassium pump? Yeah, fuck, in order to do this, Pikachu would need nearly 10 billion electrocyte cells aligned in series compared to the electric eel's several thousand. But even more terrifying, Pikachu would have to displace over 500 kilograms or over 1,000 pounds of electrolytes in order to produce this current. In order to maintain this electrolyte balance, Pikachu would have to have as many electrolytes in his system as 6.2 million bottles of Gatorade. That's over half as many that are bought and sold in the entire United States every day. And that's just for one shock. For more than that, we're talking about a Pikachu that would resemble a fucking Snorlax more than a giant rodent. That should be one fat motherfucking Pokemon. Fuck! No wonder he won't go inside a fucking Pokeball. He's not only afraid of quantum murder, he probably can't even fucking fit. Jesus Christ! Sincerely, Austin. Dear Nintendo. Actually, it's probably Dear Game Freak or maybe Dear Niantic or whatever. I don't give a shit. What I do give a shit about, Nintendo Freaktic, is Pokemon Go. And I hate that I give a shit about it. I had a good thing going with the never leaving my apartment, sitting on my ass all day, giving my Zoloft a run for its money to see if it could compensate for my mind-cripplingly terrible day-to-day lifestyle choices of bad eating and inactivity, but no! You just have to go and make a fucking viral hit out of nowhere that nobody was expecting and ruin my perfect schedule of pizza and yelling at people on Overwatch, but no. Now I have to walk and shit and get sweaty just so I can catch a Lapras. Well, I mean, try to catch a Lapras. What will actually happen is I'll throw a Pokeball, it'll suck the Pokemon in, and you'll just zoom onto the Pokeball and freeze like a doofus, forcing me to restart my application to check and see that, in fact, the Lapras fucked off ages ago, and here I sit surrounded by Weedles and fucking Rattatas! And yet, here I am, playing your stupid game that brings me zipping right back to my childhood. You know, I haven't played your games since Heart Gold and Silver came out on my regular, non-bullshit DS before you got all this newfangled 3D bullshit. And if you think your stupid phone app is gonna convince me to buy a goddamn handheld just so I can play your next Pokemon game, then congratulations for that successful as fuck marketing. But anyway, I'm not here to bitch about your incredibly addictive phone app that's motivating everyone to fucking exercise. Honestly, considering you guys didn't seem to expect it to get this big, it's goddamn impressive. People who have little to no interest in Pokemon and hell, video games have gotten into it, including myself. It brings me right back to my days in elementary school, to hunting for AAA batteries for my Game Boy Pocket with my vastly superior Pokemon Red in hand, looking to capture every goddamn Pokemon I could get my hands on. Which brings me back to why I'm writing to you today, Game Nintendo. I'm here today to talk to you about your Pokeballs. You see, when I was a kid, I didn't think about them too much. They were just the things you used to catch and deploy Pokemon. They were in the really bad anime too. They're a huge, huge icon of your show and your franchise, and they deeply influence the decorative choices of everyone living in, what, Pokemonville? Pokeworld? Pokeverse? But whatever. They're mysterious yet ubiquitous items found everywhere, and they're powerful enough to contain the god of the goddamn universe who can be bent to your will to turn the powers of creation against any mortal who stands in your way. Anyway, the point is, the older and more pedantic I get, I can't help this niggling feeling, this overwhelming sense that your Pokeballs make no goddamn sense. Well, at least they didn't until I sat down and started to parse through them. According to Bulbapedia, the Pokemon wiki, there's no known lore explanation for how Pokeballs function. Nice try, Nintendo Freaktik. You can run, but you can't hide your lore. Let's go over exactly what we know about Pokeballs. Pokeballs, the red and white ones we're familiar with, are a mass-produced technological marvel that's used to capture, contain, and control wild Pokemon. Its two most important functions are containment and control, things that otherwise can't be done to Pokemon very easily. When it is thrown at a Pokemon and makes contact, the ball opens and does something to the Pokemon, more on that later, takes the Pokemon inside it without so much as a first date and attempts to keep the Pokemon inside. If the Pokemon fails to escape, they become the property of the owner of that Pokeball. Skating right on past the slavery and dogfighting analogs, the Pokemon can later be released from the Pokeball to fight or, I don't know, do other stuff. They mostly fight. Afterward, they return and life goes on. When I was a little kid, this was all I needed to know. I didn't let things like logic or reasoning or possibility according to the laws of quantum and Newtonian physics get in the way of a good time. But now, while I'm old and cynical and hate fun, I can't help but look at these balls of Satan and ask, how the fuck do you work? At first, I thought that the Pokeballs operated like, you know, a genie's lamp. Like it just sucks in and squishes the Pokemon and it unfolds when it's released. There are a few problems with this, however. The biggest, pardon the pun, being mass. Mass is a big deal. It's the stuffness of things, more or less. There are a lot of things that exist in our universe that don't have mass, like light and radiation, but most other things you're familiar with do. Water, iron, calcium, carbon, all the things that make a human, and coincidentally, an animal. Due to the laws of conservation of mass, the mass of a system remains constant unless the stuff making up that thing is physically removed. So if you want to make, say, a hydrogen atom less massive, you have to remove something, probably a cork or whatever. Of course,
at this level, removing these building block particles drastically alters the nature of the object. That is to say, the hydrogen atom would no longer be a hydrogen atom. It'd be, I don't know, something less useful. While this would succeed in making the matter less massive, it would also completely remove your capability of using the hydrogen, or in this case, a Pokemon, the way it was intended, because it would be missing parts. Anyway, this is important because if the Pokemon are stored in their entirety inside a Pokeball, the world of Pokemon as we know it could not possibly exist. Pokeballs would be impossibly heavy, and I do mean impossibly. Pokeballs are capable of holding any Pokemon of any size or weight, including the largest and heaviest Pokemon on the Pokedex to date, Groudon. Essentially a small dinosaur, Groudon clocks in at an incredibly massive 950 kilograms or over 2,000 pounds. If Groudon is stored inside a Pokeball, these atoms aren't gone. They're just smushed inside of this ball, which means this Pokeball, the size of a baseball, would weigh 2,000 fucking pounds. Good luck lifting that, Thor. It's like squishing a goddamn Geo Metro into the space the size of an orange. We don't get a lot of insight into the exact dimensions of the Pokeball, but if we presume that the average 10-year-old's handspan is 16.91 centimeters, we can estimate pretty closely that a Pokeball is approximately 9.5 centimeters wide, and using our spectacular geometry skills, we arrive at an internal volume of 452 cubic centimeters. Knowing this, containing a Pokemon the size of Groudon would give it a mass density of over 2,100 kilograms per cubic meter, 150% the density of the goddamn sun. This little ball would be a blindingly hot mass of plasma, shooting off neutrons and blistering heat the instant the Pokemon was condensed inside it. While this would aptly explain why Pokemon disintegrate into a blinding mass of light when captured, I'm not sure I buy Ash Ketchum having the bicep of a Greek demigod. So, somewhat disappointingly, I don't think this evaluation of Pokeballs makes any sense. So, what the hell are they? How do they work? Well, hold on to your butts. We're about to get a little bit more Matt Patty than usual around here, and it's time to figure this the fuck out because I think I finally have the answer. And the answer? The answer is goddamn terrifying. I've been avoiding quantum mechanics for a long time because, well, it's fucking terrifying. Or at least I thought it was. It turns out it's just the study of how atoms and particles smaller than atoms work, move, and interact with one another. That's not so bad. Of course, this entire field of study is what built the massive and resource-demanding Large Hadron Collider, the largest particle accelerator on the planet right now. Did you know I used to live right by what used to be the largest particle accelerator in the world? That's right, nestled right on the edge of Batavia, Illinois, is a device that was built to defy the laws of man and God and smash atoms together to find out how they work, not unlike a child cutting open his G.I. Joe only to discover to his disappointment that all that's inside is a goddamn rubber band. Where was I? Oh right, quantum mechanics. So if the entire mass of a captured Pokemon isn't stored inside the ball, what the hell is going on here? In order to figure that out, we're gonna have to talk about something in our real world that lives right on the blurry edge between real science and goddamn magic, and that thing is called quantum entanglement. You see, we're used to our universe working a certain way. You throw a ball and it leaves your hand, travels through the air in an arc at a certain speed, slowing down slightly in its forward movement due to friction with the air, and slowing down in its upward movement due to gravity, eventually falling down and hitting the ground. This is essentially Newton's 3 laws of motion that we've all gotten comfortable with in play. 1. When the ball is in your hand and immobile, it's likely to stay that way until an outside force acts on it, i.e. your arm throwing it. Throwing it, it accelerates and carries with it a certain amount of energy, which has to be canceled out in order for it to stop again. These simple truths make our everyday lives relatively easy to predict, but they are a small section of the rules that govern the behavior of the universe. There's relativity, of course, the way space-time interacts with moving objects to create relative time disparities, but there's something we haven't touched on yet in this show, save for briefly, quantum behavior. When you zoom into the ball and into the atoms, things no longer behave like Sir Isaac Newton said. Things are fucking weird to the point that we have only rarely begun to understand. Things appear to be in 2 places at once and treat the linearity of time like it's a goddamn jump rope. We're not even entirely certain if there are only 3 spatial dimensions anymore. It's the laws of these quantum rules that rule the world of Pokeballs due to quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement is a very real and observable phenomenon in our world, and it's something that scientists and engineers are fucking scrambling to unpack because the consequences of quantum entanglement could completely upend everything we know about computing, the transfer of information, and even goddamn farming. When two particles interact with one another in just the right way, they can become entangled or linked together, and when something happens to one particle, it instantaneously alters the other particle. Doesn't sound like a big deal? Well, what if I told you that distance isn't a factor in quantum entanglement? These particles could be separated by millions of miles, and if you alter one, it alters the other one instantaneously with no time for information to travel. Just boop! It's done. Real-world experiments have actually managed to do this with objects as large as grains of sand over the distance of 10 miles. What does this have to do with Pokeballs? Everything. You see, these experiments that are being run are essentially making real-life Star Trek transporters that are able to transport matter across the cosmos in an instant. And this is exactly how Pokeballs work. Pokeballs aren't storage devices for the atoms of the Pokemon, they're tiny quantum computers that are used to relay information for the construction of Pokemon. But how does that work? Simple. When you throw a Pokeball and it hits a Pokemon, it immediately begins analyzing the molecular structure of the Pokemon and uploading this to a network hub somewhere. Of course, some Pokemon are more complex and are difficult to analyze, such as stronger Pokemon and much, much rarer ones that have less data to compare to in order to speed up the process. As such, the Pokeball burns out, the Pokemon is released and rematerialized in its original quantum state, and the trainer must try again. When a Pokemon is successfully captured, the data and atoms of this quantum state has been properly itemized and stored somewhere. The Pokeball is essentially a quantum state transponder that sends and receives data from a hub that could be essentially stored anywhere in the universe, with quantum entangled particles serving as the transmitters and receivers. When a trainer is ready to use a Pokemon for training, a signal is sent along with the appropriate number of atoms, and they rearrange themselves into the Pokemon. And since the quantum states are saved, this is precisely why things like poison and paralysis continue to be effective until they wear out or are removed, and also explains why trading and storage are all managed by computer. It's a lot like a Star Trek transporter, in fact. So, what happens to a Pokemon that undergoes this process? It fucking dies. No, seriously. According to the quantum theory known as, no joke, the no cloning theorem, it is impossible to create a copy of a quantum state without completely destroying the original. It's a requirement and it cannot be avoided. So a Pokemon that's captured, while it would be perfectly copied atom for atom, electron spin by electron spin, while being moved from point A to point B, would actually, as opposed to moving, would be getting copied piece by piece instantaneously, destroying copy A while creating copy B. While theoretically the stream of consciousness of the Pokemon would continue on from the perspective of Pokemon B, it would effectively be a new creation, and the original Pokemon would be fucking fucked. Pokeballs are murdering everything they fucking touch. They should be called murder balls. This means that Pokeballs are effectively the most scientifically advanced piece of technology in the entire universe and are grossly, grossly terrifying. They are capable of capturing, containing, and breaking down fucking God on a quantum level and reassemble them at a drop of a hat. So you know what? Killing God on the regular really puts the whole letting 10-year-olds walk around forcing animals to fight for money thing into perspective. But hey, that's just a theory. A game. Hi, it's me, Austin. Your worst nightmare! Don't you remember me? You should. I'm the one responsible for bursting your Pokeball conspiracy wide open. Yeah, I saw your press release by your paid lackeys at Kotaku saying that Pokeballs are just fluffy pleasure domes where Pokemon get jerked off by Jigglypuffs all day, but I know better. I know the truth, I did the math, and I know what you're hiding. But today is not about that. Today, though, is about you. And honestly, knowing that your Pokeballs are quantum murder meat grinders hasn't come even remotely close to diminishing your luster in my eyes. I've been completely hooked on your games ever since you released Pokemon Red and Blue for the regular Game Boy in 1996. What was once just a tiny plastic cartridge sporting 151 cute little monsters that you could force to fight for your amusement has exploded into the second largest video game media franchise in history, second only to Mario, because apparently Nintendo owns literally everything. Now we've got over 800 of these little pieces of crap to keep track of, and Christ, it is making me feel old. Last month, you unleashed Pokemon Sun and Moon into the universe, and of course, like every other Pokemon fan in the world, I wanted to play it. So, I grabbed the son of a bitch as soon as it dropped. Ha! Wrong! I've been locked out of new titles from the Pokemon franchise for years! I think I have a regular DS laying around somewhere and a copy of Heart Gold, but the fact of the matter is, ever since I introduced more vegetables and prune juice into my diet, I don't spend enough time on the John to justify buying a new handheld. But that doesn't matter. What was good and fun about the original Red and Blue has been preserved through the ages. Capture mystical monsters in a coconut, force them to commit mass murder in order to gain levels, rock, paper, scissors your way through the world humiliating other dogfighters, and eventually, after leaving a trail of Rattata corpses behind you a mile long, your Pokemon will evolve from an adorable baby with cute little cheeks into a horrifying Goliath that has replaced all of its memories of cuddles with the desire to rend the flesh off the face of anything that stands in your way. Fun for the whole family. All that's changed is more creative recruits to the roster and shinier animations. Strangely, they decided to keep the 56K modem Pokemon noises through the years for reasons that are beyond me. Anyway, instead of crying about my inability to play Sun and Moon, I booted up a copy of the objectively superior version of the original Pokemon, Pokemon Red. And you know, Game Freak, it was just after leaving Viridian Forest as I was walking in circles in Route 2, killing Rattatas and Pidgeys by the barrelful so I could get my Charmander a high enough level so I could shame Brock by pissing all over his face with a Fire-type Pokemon. I reached level 16, my Charmander evolved into a Charmeleon, and it hit me! Pokemon evolution makes no goddamn sense. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yes, Austin, I know you're on the Game Theorists. You know where Game Theory is. They covered Pokemon evolution a hell of a lot already, especially pointing out that Pokemon evolution actually resembles metamorphosis more than actual bona fide evolution. To which I say, my sweet summer child, you have no idea. You don't know what I know. But when I tell you, then you'll finally understand the truth, and you will realize that there's no place to hide from the terror. Yes, Matt Pat was right in his video from 2011 that I recommend you definitely go watch now because holy shit, it is so adorable. Baby Matt Pat! Oh, my heart, look at that! 4:3 ratio, chunky as hell animations, aww. Anyway, the process of Pokemon evolution, just like Digimon evolution, resembles more closely the biological process of metamorphosis than it does actual evolution. Evolution is a lengthy process wherein biologically advantageous traits are passed down through generations and exaggerated until eventually a species no longer resembles where it started. Metamorphosis, by contrast, is just a normal part of an animal's life cycle, where it moves from stage to stage, fulfilling new roles in the ecosystem. Like a caterpillar that gives up eating metric butt tons of food to become a butterfly so it can book a one-way ticket to Bone City. Or a tadpole that gives up eating a metric butt tons of food to become a frog so it can book a one-way ticket to Bone City.
You're living in City.
Sensing a theme here? Me too, Mother Nature, you filthy, filthy beast. Anyway, this is what Pokemon do. They aren't spending thousands of years slowly shaving off inadequate traits and slapping on new ones. They're undergoing sudden, drastic changes to their anatomy in order to accomplish bigger and better things. The jury's still out on tickets to Bone City, but I'm guessing that has something to do with the ESRB ratings more than anything else. Nobody really wants to see that. So, what? Pokemon undergo metamorphosis. What's the big deal? Well, I'll tell you the big deal, because while this may be true, the Poke process of Poke metamorphosis is, at its heart, the key to the entire puzzle. And it's what makes the Pokemon universe truly, utterly, mortifyingly, mortifying. Sorry. I have a newborn. Sometimes the words just come out the way they come out. Where was I? Oh, right. Metamorphosis. There's a bit of a problem with this Pokemon evolution equals metamorphosis theory, though. True, in almost every conceivable way it is an organism moving from one stage to another, advancing along a path toward maturity and new biological roles. However, there is one key factor that makes all the difference in the world: time. You see, Pokemon evolution happens nearly instantly, unlike metamorphosis, which actually takes days, weeks, or even months to be fully realized. Metamorphosis requires a huge investment of energy. I mean, look at how goddamn fat this caterpillar is and how freaking tiny the butterfly it turns into is by comparison. Well, what does this have to do with Pokemon? In order to understand that, we're gonna have to talk about conservation of mass. Put simply, conservation of mass means you can't get something from nothing, and you can't turn something into nothing. If you take our whole wide universe and accept that inside this thing we call everything, there's a set amount of stuff. You can't get more, you can't get less. And inside this thing called everything, if you want to make something bigger, you gotta take stuff from something else. If you wanna make something smaller, you gotta put that mass somewhere. It's why teenagers have unstoppably voracious appetites. They're growing at a rate unprecedented in their lives and therefore need more stuff to make their bodies into more stuff. And it's why caterpillars get so goddamn fat. They've got an absurd amount of work ahead of them, literally melting their bodies into a caterpillar soup, a sentence I really wish I hadn't read at 4:30 a.m., and rebuilding it into a thing that can fly and bone every other butterfly in the vicinity. Pokemon metamorphize in seconds and almost always get larger than they were before, which means the energy and materials other animals would gather over days, Pokemon are sucking up in mere moments. This instantaneous, huge requirement of energy and stuff cannot, according to every law of physics we know of, be circumvented. All Pokemon are different, but in order to understand the terrifying implications of this process, we're gonna look at one of my favorite Pokemon of all time, Magikarp. Magikarp is amazing because it goes from being easily the most useless piece of garbage in the entire game to being a freaking dragon with the flick of a switch. And I have to admit, when I was a little kid, I foolishly paid the con man at the entrance to Mount Moon $500 to get this totally useless trash Pokemon. Damn it! And that bastard offers no return. Swindler! If you're patient though, and you're able to raise this Magikarp to level 20, it turns into a freaking Gyarados, a Pokemon badass enough to chew its way through the Elite Four if so inclined. Magikarp is based on, carp, the garbage rat of the fish world. Weighing in at a respectable 10 kilograms, upon evolving, this piece of rejected sushi grows to an immense 235 kilogram dragon, over 500 freaking pounds. That's a mass increase of over 2,000%. In order to figure out what this means in real world terms, we're gonna have to build a working model of what the heck a Magikarp, and by extension, a Gyarados, is made out of. Taking the real world ratfish carp as our substitute, since it's the closest thing in real life to an actual Magikarp, we can actually figure this out. And after combing through no less than 6 different academic papers published over the past 60 years, I finally have all the answers. And the answers are god-damned terrifying. I'm gonna go through this really quickly because this is complicated, boring, and I have a tendency to talk too much, and I really want to keep this under 20 minutes, so here we go. Piecing together chemical analysis that have been run over the common carp for decades, we can surmise that on average, the common carp, and by extension a Magikarp, is comprised of approximately 78.15% water, 6.85% tissues, 5% blood and trace minerals, and 10% skeleton. For the sake of simplicity, we're gonna presume that a fully grown Gyarados is comprised of the same ratio, the same materials. Unless you know of a real life river dragon I can compare to, but no, not that one, that's a cartoon. Starting with the easiest, water. Water is comprised of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, and is easily one of the simplest molecules we'll find inside our little magical beast. Next, the skeleton, which is mostly calcium hydroxyapatite, an incredibly complex complex molecule comprised of 10 calcium atoms, 24 phosphorus atoms, 26 oxygen atoms, and 2 hydrogen atoms. Believe it or not, that was the easy part. Now the tough stuff. I'm gonna do blood and trace elements next because believe it or not, this is actually the next least terrible aspect. Carp are comprised of dozens of different compounds, some organic and some inorganic. The difference between inorganic and organic molecules is honestly pretty arbitrary. An inorganic one is just stuff that's already in the universe: water, oxygen, and iron. Organic compounds are essentially these very same inorganic elements and atoms rearranged to form complex structures designed for complex roles in the bodies of living things. We just call them vitamins. Carp are comprised of primarily nitrogen, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, phosphorus, sulfur, iron, manganese, vitamin A, carotene, vitamin C, nicotinic acid, riboflavin, and pantothenic acid, with nicotinic acid, vitamin C, nitrogen, and sodium making up the largest percentages of trace compounds in parts per million, adding a whole new mess of stuff we need to make our fish. But this, as bad as it looks, isn't even remotely close to the worst part. The most complex series of compounds is nested in this deviously small little section, the 6.85% of body tissue. Specifically, these body tissues are split into 2 broad categories: proteins, or amino acids, and lipids, aka fats. Amino acids are, simply speaking, meat, and there are over 18 of them in our Magikarp: alanine, arginine, aspartic acid, cysteine, glutamine, glycine, histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, proline, serine, threonine, tryptophan, tyrosine, and valine. These amino acids are just differently arranged carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, and sometimes sulfur. Thankfully, there's only 15 lipids in carp, and they're just carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Myristic, myristoleic, palmitic, palmitoleic, stearic, oleic, linoleic, amylinoleic, alpha-linoleic, icosanoic, arachidonic, icosapatinoic, and docosapatinoic, and this one is impossible to say. Taking all these atoms and compounds and modifying them by their requisite percentages, we get a really close approximation of exactly how much of what stuff is needed to take a little itty-bitty Magikarp and turn it into a behemothing Gyarados. Remember, something doesn't come from nothing. Nothing comes from nothing. We see that the biggest draw of materials is going to be oxygen and hydrogen, which makes sense. At 78% water, and with almost every single compound in the body being made from some combination of oxygen and hydrogen, it makes sense that together they make up 58% of the required atoms by mole. Next is phosphorus, with a really steep drop off into calcium and carbon, and the rest really aren't worth talking about. There's only one way that a tiny 10 kilogram Magikarp can explode into a 235 kilogram Gyarados in mere moments, by gobbling up over 200 kilograms of garbage in the near vicinity. I'm talking about dirt, atmosphere, grass, trees, and buildings. Most of the things that are on this list are in our world in abundance. Carbon, sulfur, calcium, potassium, sodium, magnesium, iron, and manganese are all in dirt alone. The real problem comes from hydrogen and oxygen, which unfortunately make up most of our colossal Pokemon here. But Austin, you may be saying, water's everywhere, so is oxygen. It's in the atmosphere. It's what we breathe. You're not totally wrong, but the truth of the matter is that the air we breathe is mostly nitrogen. Less than a quarter of it is oxygen, and at sea level, there's only a quarter of a kilogram of oxygen per cubic meter, meaning that in order to get enough oxygen to build all those molecules, you're looking at our Gyarados sucking in all the available oxygen within a radius of 6.5 meters in a matter of seconds. And hydrogen? Things look incredibly dour. You see, you may think, oh, it's no big deal. There's water vapor. That'll take care of it. Yeah, even on the most humid days, you're looking at 200 picograms of hydrogen per cubic kilometer. That means in order to get enough hydrogen to build this freaking dragon in mere moments, this Magikarp is gonna have to pull hydrogen from every available nearby source. And nearby is relative. Any hydrogen source within a 223 billion kilometer radius is fair game. And since there's very, very little hydrogen in open air, that means you better hope to Christ that there's a barrel of water between you and that Magikarp when it decides to Pokevolve, or guess what? You're the most water-rich source available, and that Pokemon is gonna squeeze you dry like a sponge. And Gyarados is just an extreme example. Any Pokemon undergoing an extreme growth spurt in fractions of a second would be like a goddamned hand grenade going off as it immediately sucks in all available nutrients and elements in the vicinity, bursting pipes in local buildings to get at their water, killing other Pokemon in the area as it robs them of their vital vitamins and minerals, bursting eardrums from the massive pressure differentials formed by huge volumes of the local atmosphere immediately collapsing, blasting holes in the ground 6 meters deep, and sending all rejected elements flying out in all directions at high fractions of the speed of light, ionizing nearby atoms and sending gamma radiation and flying debris into anyone foolish enough to not hit that B button to cancel the evolution as quickly as possible. The world of Pokemon should look less like a beautiful rural Japanese landscape and more like the post-apocalyptic hellscape of Fallout, full of irradiated craters, nutrient-thirsty monsters, and idiot humans who weren't smart enough to murder every Pokemon in sight with lead pipes after the first one exploded into its next form. Forget dogfighting analogies and forget quantum murder from Pokeballs. Pokemon themselves are black holes of voracious destruction, ticking time bombs just sitting there looking adorable to keep you off guard just long enough for them to turn into implosive, tiny nuclear bombs before emerging as something stronger, meaner, and altogether more terrifying. Jesus Christ, Game Freak, you scare the ever-loving crap out of me. Sincerely, Austin. Hi! It's me, Austin! Remember? The guy? The one who proved Pokeballs are murder due to the no-cloning theorem of quantum mechanics? Or that Pikachu should be a giant fat blob in order to make those frightening shocks? I'm back to ruin your day, because I love nothing more than ruining things that I love for reasons unbeknownst to both me and my therapist. In any case, this week I'm back to talking about Pokeballs because these things are frickin' complicated, and because on my last video covering the topic, everyone rushed to correct me on my explanation for how Pokeballs work in the realm of physics. It ain't quantum mechanics, my viewers told me, it's light! Pokeballs turn Pokemon into light. Well, dang. All right, let's do this. Or at least I thought we were gonna do this. I had all my research done, ready to blow your minds about the weird properties of photons in a container and inertial mass, the only known method for turning matter directly into light, and the horrifying implications and death that those practices would invariably cause everyone. In fact, I was so happy about this topic that I gleefully told MatPat about it, and he asked me one offhanded question that screwed everything up.
Did you double check that that's really canon?
Yeah, I was just casually and kinda smugly telling him about my topic and how the process of turning Pokemon into mass would release energy equivalent to over 400 Tsar Bombas, the strongest hydrogen bombs ever detonated, when he asked me this one simple question: is this canon? And of course, no. It's not. Days of research down the drain for nothing! And after that, he went on to ask, what does this mean for Pokemon who escape capture? Why do they become easier to capture when you beat them up? Needless to say, he's right. Apart from not even being real game canon, there's a ton of problems with this theory, but screw it. Into the trash bin it goes. But it did get me thinking about Pokeballs. If we just, accept that they work through the magic of friendship and whatnot, there's still a ton of unanswered questions. How does a Pokemon's strength affect how easily it's captured? Why do you need to beat them within an inch of their lives to increase your chances of catching them? What's the deal with all these different Pokeball types? And, perhaps most importantly, why does putting a Pokemon inside of a Pokeball allow you to instantly control their every action? Today, we're gonna get to the truth. And the truth is, well, you know the rest. Before I go any further, just a heads up. I'm gonna be talking about experimentation on animals in a very clinical and nondescript way. Keep that in mind. Leave if you need to, or just be ready for it when it comes. In order to unwrap the terrifying technology of Pokeballs, we're gonna have to start in one place first: the brain. Barring the occasional sentient computer program, sentient alphabet, evil space virus, and gods of the universe, Pokemon are animals, and all animals have brains. Not all are as complex as human brains with our massive neocortex and 2.5 petabytes of storage space, but they're there almost exclusively if we expand our definition of brain to include a bundle of neurons or nerves capable of storing information. Octopuses are pretty cool in that they actually don't store all of their neurons in their brains, but have some in their arms. Isn't that awesome? We gotta start here because probably the most important thing a Pokeball does, aside from contain a Pokemon, is control them. The instant you catch a Pokemon, it's yours. And well, the brain controls everything. Brains are incredibly complex machines, and they're some of the oldest tech that we inherit as mammals. The first fossil evidence for proto-brain structures were found in worms over 500 million years ago. The first brains were effectively invented by evolution just to keep things running properly. It may not seem like it at first glance, but hearts, lungs, muscles, digestive systems, these things all need to be carefully monitored and controlled. Plants don't need brains because their systems are less complex and more automated, but when you work in using oxygen to metabolize sugars to move muscles, things get real complex really quickly, and you can't just rely on the structure of the cells themselves to maintain them. This proto-brain eventually evolved into the limbic system with the hippocampus and amygdala, which is capable of handling spatial learning and fear avoidance, which is a huge asset in a biological system. This is more or less what most animals on the Earth have, with huge diversity from species to species and arranged in slightly different ways, but when you get closer to mammals, you start getting your cerebral cortex, which is capable of higher level thinking and pattern recognition, and the neocortex, which is exclusive to mammals and is a freaking beast. Thumbs get a lot of credit in human evolution, but it's our massive neocortexes that allow us to store vast amounts of interwoven patterns that put every other animal to shame. We'll get to how this applies to Pokemon in a second, but there's one more thing that I have to talk about because it's the final piece of the puzzle that, once you understand it, take what we know about our brains and how they function across species and put it all together, you will never, ever look at Pokeballs the same way again. Last year, in an interview with Kotaku, Junichi Masuda, Pokemon's Sun and Moon producer, gave us the first and to this date only glimpse into how Pokeballs work. Here it is in his own words. It's safe to say that it's very comfortable inside a Pokeball. It's a very comfortable environment, maybe the equivalent of a high-end suite room in a fancy hotel. Ugh. God, that is horrifying. Oh. Wait, you don't know yet. You don't know what I know. Okay, well, let's rectify that right now because we're done burying the lead. After putting all the pieces together, I've come to the conclusion that Pokeballs can only work by giving Pokemon severe and debilitating Stockholm Syndrome. Want proof? Then come along, children, because as terrible as that sounds, that's only half of the horrors Pokeballs have waiting for your cute creatures on the inside. Studies on Stockholm Syndrome are rare and hard to come by. In fact, strictly speaking, it's not entirely clear that it is an actually unique condition or if it's just a subset of post-traumatic stress disorder and Stockholm Syndrome is just a catchy media way to describe it, but the best study I could find exploring the topic asserts that if it is a unique psychiatric condition or at least a unique subset of PTSD, it only occurs under very specific circumstances with 4 qualities. 1. The victim experienced direct threats of physical or emotional violence. 2. They are isolated from their peers or otherwise restrained. 3. They've had an opportunity to escape but failed to take it. And 4. They show sympathy for their captors. This, to a T, is exactly what happens to a captured Pokemon. Think about it. In order to capture a Pokemon, you gotta weaken it by beating the crap out of it. Biting, clawing, flamethrowering, poisoning, these are direct threats to the safety and well-being of the Pokemon in question. All of these Pokemon are trapped inside a Pokeball. Some escape, some don't, but it's undeniable. All successfully captured Pokemon failed to escape, and in the end, they work for you. They'll do whatever you say. Other studies on Stockholm Syndrome as a subset of PTSD assert that this happens as a preservation tactic, that the need to survive overrides the hatred of a person inflicting harm upon you. In fact, Stockholm Syndrome is way more likely to take place in instances where captors show perceived compassion or kindness for their victims after originally threatening them. This creates a positive feedback loop, which creates an attachment for the captors. You know, kind of like beating the crap out of a helpless animal and then tossing it into a Pokeball that resembles a luxury resort. But Austin, I hear you saying, PTSD, Stockholm Syndrome, these things are human afflictions. Soldiers and people who are in horrible situations get them, sure, but animals and definitely Pokemon don't. And that, my friend, is where you're dead wrong. PTSD can have long-lasting, sometimes permanent effects on people who experience it. It's not just psychological effects either. Looking all the way down to biochemistry, PTSD is essentially an overabundance of the stress hormone cortisol running rampant in the body. Cortisol is what's responsible for your fight or flight response, and, as you can imagine, can be freaking terrible to experience on a day-to-day basis for no reason at all. Cortisol, aside from creating omnipresent anxiety, can have disastrous physical effects on your body. Extreme examples being the physical deformities in Cushing's syndrome, which is caused by an overactive adrenal gland. All of our most important research into PTSD has come from animal testing, which is, you know, kinda horrifying because they literally had to experimentally and systematically traumatize rats and other animals in order to elicit PTSD. And they discovered that PTSD primarily hides within the limbic system, specifically the hippocampus and the brainstem, in a little cluster of cells called the locus coeruleus, which is responsible for creating and distributing neurotransmitters throughout the body. And if you'll remember from earlier, the limbic system is one of the oldest pieces of brain tech that exists. It's the basic stuff that just about everything with moving parts has, which means almost any animal that is susceptible to fear is susceptible to PTSD. And this is the most important piece that explains everything. Pokeballs are capable of mimicking a luxury resort scenario, but I have to believe that they do way more than that. In order to keep Pokemon docile and contained, they would have to continuously bathe them in stimuli that keeps their fear and anxiety levels high. This is why they're always ready to fight. Their bodies are flooded with cortisol all the time. And yeah, cortisol can cause physical deformities in high doses, but you know what prevents cortisol metabolization into muscle and fat tissue? Anabolic steroids. This is exactly why anabolic steroids promote strong muscle growth. Cortisol causes wasting. Anabolic steroids say, get out of here, cortisol. And to boot, capture Pokemon are always stronger than wild Pokemon of the same level. This is why Pokeballs are freaking dope dens designed to psychologically manipulate and suppress the will of Pokemon so they will always be willing participants in the weird dogfighting based economy of the world of Pokemon. And this is why different Pokeballs are more effective than others. While anything with a limbic system is susceptible to PTSD, conditioning, and Stockholm Syndrome, not all nervous systems are exactly identical. So some Pokeballs, say ones meant to capture bugs, are more tweaked to their specific biochemistry. This is exactly why Pokeballs don't always work. Whenever a Pokemon breaks free of a Pokeball, they're saying, sorry bro, you can't control me, you don't own me, I am my own Poke person. reason. That is, until you beat them up a bit more until their legs don't work. At the end of the day, whether they're quantum entanglement devices that break down Pokemon on a molecular level, or they're just magic balls filled with mind-altering drugs and horrific brain pictures like Clockwork Orange, Pokeballs are, at their core, manipulative, abusive, cruel devices of torture that exist to pacify animals and turn them into bloodthirsty killers ready to fight anything their masters demand them to at a moment's notice. No freaking wonder Pikachu won't get back inside his Pokeball. He is one smart rat. Sincerely, Austin. Hi, it's me, Austin, and I'm here once again to take your cute, beloved franchise adored by millions and twist it until it's barely recognizable for both my own amusement and for the amusement of other cynical jerks out there like me. Recently, MatPat deduced that being a Pokemon trainer was the worst career move you could possibly make, and you know what? He's totally right. The boring, old, workaday trainer job is not only grueling, it's just not freaking worth it. Amazingly though, in my own journey into the Pokemon universe, I discovered something that Matt missed. Something that, honestly, I think we all missed. I didn't see a single comment in that video about this. There is a secret loophole that if you're willing to forgo the normal path of wearing holes in the bottom of your shoes, walking miles down routes 1 through 17 in your quest to become the literal best Pokemon trainer in the universe, only to be rewarded with enough change to buy yourself a victory dinner in a cheap hotel room for the night, you can become the richest person in the entire world in practically no time at all and destroy entire nations in the process. And in order to do that, you're gonna have to do one simple thing. Get yourself a Pokemon that knows the move Payday. Matt gets a pass for missing this move because, well, for one thing, it kind of misses the spirit of the Pokemon games and the anime, which is to go on an adventure and enslave sentient creatures and force them to fight each other to the death for your amusement and profit. But I actually discovered this completely by accident. You see, my original goal, the original video I was going to do, was to figure out, of all 728 Pokemon moves, which was the most dangerous and damaging of them all. And I got all the way down the list to move 6. Move 6! 6 entries in and I'm already distracted. I'm trying to figure things out, give the people the blood, gore, and horror that they want out of the game meant for children, and here I am, distracted by the jingling car keys of, boy, I just gotta know how much money you can make from Payday. For the purposes of this video, we're gonna use the figure MatPat uses, where 100 Pokedollars is 39 cents in US currency, which I did double check and seems to be on the level. Anyway, on with the show. How much money can you make using the move Payday? For those of you who don't know, Payday is a move learned almost exclusively by the Pokemon Meowth or their evolutionary forms. It's a physical, normal type move where your Pokemon attacks your opponent by literally throwing money at them. As a nice bonus, at the end of the battle, you get to pick up all the money from the ground and keep it, providing you wipe the blood and fur of the murder victim off of it first. The way the amount is calculated is pretty simple. It's the level of your Pokemon times 5 per use. If you use it 3 times with a level 5 Meowth, that's 75 smackers. Use it once with a level 100 Meowth, boom! 5 hundo right in the pocket. All for the low price of a little bit of Pokemon PTSD. So basically, on that little bit of information right there, you can see that the goal to making a buck would be to simply have the highest level Pokemon use Payday the most in a short amount of time, right? And for the sake of simplicity, and to save room for later because I have a lot of info to get through today, let's run through it like this. You take a level 100 Meowth to a high level, like Pony Gauntlet, and start running in circles. Let's say that you have the ability Illuminate active, which doubles your encounter rate, and let's say you were even smarter and equipped an amulet coin to double the money you earn at the end of the battle. Taking into account that each step takes exactly a fifth of a second, that means that it'll be approximately 1.077 seconds on average until you encounter a wild Pokemon, which will be around level 50 to 55. Boom! You two-shot it using Payday. The Pokemon dies without getting a chance to write home to his family. Since you're level 100, you use Payday twice. That's 2,000 big ones right there, or $7.80. And then you rinse and repeat this over and over and over again. Given that the average battle would last approximately 42.83 seconds, plus the average of 1.077 seconds in between battles, this means that you're earning a cool 45.54 Pokedollars, or 18 cents per second. That is a whopping $10.66 per minute, or $639.49 per hour. That is over 28 times the average hourly wage in the United States, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. That means if you work 8 hours a day, 9 to 5, murder, genociding helpless Pokemon 5 days a week for a whole year, you'll make a salary of, get this, over $1.3 million a year. Boom! Suck on that, Elite Four. Instead of being the very best that no one ever was, I'm just gonna sit around in luxurious capitalist fashion and reap the fruits of my cute little cat's labor every day before going home to my glorious McMansion. Like, between being a nomad with aching feet and being a millionaire entrepreneur, I know which I would pick. But it doesn't stop there. Oh, no. Because a business is not a business if it cannot be scaled up. So, how do we scale this up? Well, for that, we're gonna have to turn to YouTuber Verlicifius the Third. I don't know how to say it. Anyway, he figured out a way to twist and exploit the world of Pokemon for his own personal gain in a truly magnificent fashion. Using a combination of the Pokemon Smeargle, who can learn a move called Sketch, which allows him to copy any move he wants, and the SOS mechanic from Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon allows you to build a Pokemon with the moveset Roost, Payday, Happy Hour, and False Swipe. Happy Hour doubles the amount of reward money that you receive from a battle, which combined with the amulet coin leads to a 4 times money payout. Now we're cooking with gas! Whereas these combined skills allow you to maximize your payouts, Roost and False Swipe allow you to essentially prolong a battle for an eternity, forcing your opponent to call for help every turn while you mercilessly pelt them with money, turning the game from a cute visualization of cartoonish dogfighting into a sort of meat grinder simulator where you drop Pokemon in one end and pick blood-soaked money out the other. Eventually, you reach a maximum payout of 100,000 Pokedollars, or $390, end the battle, collect your winnings, and start the process all over again. Now, we know that these battles happen in real time because time in the Pokemon world progresses at the exact same rate as our world, and amazingly, this streamlined process bumps your salary from a still pretty impressive $639.49 per hour to $1,217.64 per hour, or $2.4 million a year. That is quite the frickin' stack of cash. A suspiciously high stack of cash, which brings us back to what I mentioned earlier. And destroy entire nations in the process. Those of you who know a thing or two about economics know that money doesn't come from nowhere. And as far as I see it, the move Payday, a move that, remember, involves throwing a literal, valid, spendable currency at your opponent, acquires its money in one of 2 ways. Either A, it's a glorified printing press where whoever uses it is essentially pooping out fresh money on the fly, which means you're really gonna have to invest in some money laundering. Or B, it's teleporting valid currency from somewhere in the world into your Pokemon's hands. Essentially glorified theft, which, yikes. Now, I'm gonna be honest. According to my calculations, one person doing this would not negatively impact the economy one way or the other by all that much. Although, I'm sure it would definitely raise some eyebrows over at the IRS. But if the chaotic windfall of bitcoins has taught us anything, where there's easy money to be made, short-sighted people will come rushing from all corners of the globe. There's a 100% chance if this money-making scheme were discovered, it would not remain a secret. And in order to figure out the economic impact of this move, we're gonna have to figure out how many people are using it across the entire world of Pokemon. Now, it's hard to tell exactly how many people would catch wise, but we can build an approximation from the very video that outlines this method. As of this moment, the money-making guide by Verlicify has 1,900 likes on it, which is probably the closest estimate we'll get for folk who are playing Ultra Sun and Moon that are using this method. Now, hold on to your butts, because we're gonna use this one number, 1,900, and use it to blow your electrode. So considering that at least 1,900 people are presumably using this method to get rich in Ultra Sun and Moon, we need to figure out a few things. The population of the various Pokemon regions, their gross domestic product, or GDP, which is economic shorthand for how much money this country is worth. Although that's a bit reductive and it's incredibly difficult to know for certain how much money is in the world, this is the closest thing to a real number we can use to estimate how big the giant pool of Pokedollars is. The Pokemon canon is comprised of 7 major regions: Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, Unova, Kalos, and Alola, all of which are based off of real-world locations, almost to the exact layout. Kanto is the Kanto region of Japan, Johto is the Kansai region, Hoenn is the Kyushu, and Sinnoh is the Hokkaido region, while Unova is New York and New Jersey, and Kalos is France, and Alola, of course, is Iceland. Hawaii. Using the maps we have available, I overlaid them with the various regions in our real world they're based on to get estimates of their area, which we can use in conjunction with population densities to get an estimated population. Unova was the most difficult since the Hudson, Hackensaw, and the East aren't perfectly aligned with Unova, while Alola was the easiest since I could just copy and paste everything. Given the approximate population densities of each region the Pokemon ones are based on and their square miles and kilometers, I determined that Kanto has a population of 738,000, Johto 894,000, Hoenn 987,000, Sinnoh 1.3 million, Unova 8.7 million, Kalos 547,000, and Alola 897,000, or a total population of 14.17 million in all the mainstay Pokemon games. Since 1,900 people is exactly 0.21% of the population of Alola, and I'm presuming for the sake of simplicity that this percentage of users remains consistent across region, means that in total there's approximately 29,993 people using the Payday, Happy Hour, Amulet, Pokemon Genocide method of money making. But we're still not done yet, because while this is incredibly helpful in figuring out how much money is being created, it doesn't give us a sense for what the economic impact would be. For that, we need to multiply the GDP per capita, or the gross domestic product per person, for each person in each region according to the GDP of their respective countries, with the United States having the highest GDP PC of $57,015.66, followed by Japan with $38,889.76, and finally France with $36,846.04, which when multiplied appropriately gives us a total Pokemon GDP of 1.8 trillion Pokedollars, or 724 billion real-world dollars. Woo! Okay, got all that? Need a glass of water? I sure as hell do. All right. Our giant pool of money for the sake of this video is $724 billion, but we've got almost 30,000 people, or 0.21% of the population, working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week to make the most money they possibly can, which, interestingly, it's estimated that approximately 0.33% of the population is chasing Bitcoin, so this number holds up. So let me kick you a scenario. You're the first person to discover this Pokedollar printing press method. You start making your thousands every day, and one day someone is like, hey, why do you seem so rich all of a sudden? And you know, she's your best friend, so you decide, what's the harm in telling one person? So you give her the details and keep on going with your business, effectively printing your own money, and all the while, the online forums dedicated to Pokedollar mining are starting to stir. Creepy, scammy companies are starting to form. And suddenly, 1 year later, everyone's joining the HODL gang. Your secret is out, and now 30,000 people are murdering Psyducks on the daily to increase their Pokemon bank account size so they can creep ever closer to that elusive Poke-Lambo. Presuming that this method prints money instead of, say, stealing it from old ladies a la teleportation, what does this mean? Inflation. With this many people printing this much money, you've grown from infusing the market with a mere $2,435,271.90 a year to a terrifyingly high $75,964,185,008.20 per year, creating, get this, an annual inflation rate of 10.48%, which is not great. A little inflation is a good thing. The United States Federal Reserve tries to keep it hovering at about 3% each year because it encourages spending and growth. 10.48%, though, would have a pretty negative impact on the economy. People would want to save money or even borrow money because $100 that they have in January would be worth $89.50 in December. We know for a fact that inflation like this is bad because it's the rate that our country hovered at during several bad economic crises in the past 50 years. While it likely wouldn't kill people, unemployment rates would rise and the government would start investigating why inflation had creeped so high without their input. What markets are unmonitored and unregulated, they'd be asking.
That's a scam!
And boom! Suddenly you and your firm of 30,000 people are before a congressional ethics board, sanctions are being imposed, and blam! Payday grinding is outlawed. Not the greatest outcome, but it's also by far not the worst. The worst thing that happens here is you, yourself, become the Bernie Madoff or Martin Shkreli of the Pokemon world. They'd write about you in textbooks for Business 101 courses about the dangers of arbitrage chasing. It's not great, but at least you're still alive, and maybe you could get a killer book deal out of it. The same, however, cannot be said if Payday, instead of acting as a printing press, straight up steals money from somewhere. And honestly, knowing the way the Pokemon world works, this seems far more likely. I mean, how is a cat or whatever the hell Smearcole is, a Bob Rossian dog? Anyway, how are they capable of straight up making money out of nowhere? The logistics alone of keeping that much metal stored in their bodies for spontaneous synthesis is troubling, whereas Pokeballs and other Pokemon like Abra, Kadabra, and Alakazam have proven that teleportation and casual quantum entanglement abuse is a regular thing in this universe. It makes much more sense that those Pokemon are teleporting money out of local cash registers, safes, banks, and mattresses into their hands to throw at their enemies. And holy crap, if this is the case, the whole frickin' world is screwed. Sure, at first, everything's hunky-dory, but after a few weeks of 30,000 people effectively stealing money from others, the world economy would start to collapse. I mean, just for a reference, the top 0.21% of the wealthy in America control a little over 11% of the wealth in the country. And conservatively, it took them like at least some years to get that wealth, probably decades. It would take the 0.21% of Pokemon trainers using these moves 282 days, just 10 months to be at the same level. And it would just go up from there. I mean, whatever your political leanings, look out your window, look on Twitter, things are, not great right now. People are angry, some people want to protect their wealth, other people want to redistribute the wealth, and we're just here. We're right here where the top 0.21% controls 11.37% of the wealth. Can you imagine what it would be like if the 0.21% controlled, a quarter of the wealth? Well, less than 2 years into our scenario, that's where we are in the Pokemon universe. Half the wealth, less than 3.5 years. By the end of a 5-year period, if this pattern continued, the top 0.21% of the wealthy in the Pokemon world would control almost 3/4 of all the money in existence. There would be an unstoppable uprising, probably long before this point. Political inclination would hardly matter because everyone's on the same page when you're starving. Left wing, right wing, they'd all unite under the banner of cutting your freaking head off so they can afford to eat. Redistribution of wealth wouldn't even be a political policy issue. It'd be the meaning between life and death for 99.79% of the world population. And once 30,000 heads rolled, there'd undoubtedly be bloody civil wars as masses of hungry, desperate people with different life experiences and ideologies fought over how to distribute this money back to the people. It would be a war with death unlike we've ever seen. It'd be devastating, span entire continents, and cost the lives of millions of innocents, all because you didn't want to work for an honest living. So, sure, maybe Pokemon training isn't the best living, but it's a hell of a lot better than spending your life in prison or millions of people cheering as your head is chopped off. Be safe. Be responsible. Do not use Payday. And apparently don't be a Pokemon trainer either. Just, be one of those dudes who owns a shop selling Pokeballs to 10-year-olds. It's so much safer. Sincerely, Austin. You see, my original goal, the original video I was going to do, was to figure out, of all 728 Pokemon moves, which was the most dangerous and damaging of them all. What did I get myself into? Dear Game Freak, so I'm trying to do this thing where I don't yell so much. Let's just see how I do today, because today's episode, an episode I picked explicitly because I thought it would be easy, is not easy. It was grueling. It was exhausting, but we're here and I've run the numbers and I've arrived at some startling conclusions. Which Pokemon move is the most dangerous? Not the most damaging, not the most fatal to a target, the most dangerous. Because the other two are really easy answers. Just look at the stats, all the moves, run the numbers, and bingo bongo, you have the move that is most likely to kill an opponent. Nah. Today, we have bigger plans. I've poured over all 728 official Pokemon moves, boiled that down to the most dangerous 204, manually reviewed and researched all of those, reduced the list to 37, then 8, then 3, and then, finally, 1. The most dangerous mass-murdering move is, well, we'll get there. Together. Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's do this. Figuring out what the most deadly and dangerous Pokemon move is in a game that casually has giant fire-breathing lizards, self-destructing ping-pong balls, and so many gods that are capable of manipulating space-time that apparently 10-year-old children can capture in tiny balls and force to do their bidding, that is a huge ask, but not impossible if we limit ourselves to a few rules. First of all, in order to judge the most dangerous move, we're going to limit our sample size to one instance of the move. I mean, Flamethrower could easily be more dangerous than Fissure if you let a Charizard rampage through a city and burn each person to a crisp piece by piece, or get a Coughing to poison the water supply of a nearby town by repeatedly using Toxic so it's no longer diluted into harmlessness. And that's basically it as far as restrictions go. Z moves, combinations of items are all on the table. And while initially I did consider moves like the classic Hyper Beam, Hydro Pump, Metronome because it can do a ton of different moves, Fissure, and like a bajillion others that are too numerous to name, they immediately got eliminated in favor of moves that were so obviously more damaging. After a lot of hemming and hawing, I ended up with this short list of possibilities. Hail, Aeroblast, Magnitude, Sheer Cold, Spatial Rend, Black Hole Eclipse, Roar of Time, and Continental Crush. These are all pretty possibly devastating, and you may immediately think of other moves that are similar, like Fissure, Blizzard, Sunny Day, etc., but I decided that these 8 represented the most potentially lethal moves of their class and category for reasons that I will go over pretty quickly to save on time. Hail should be immediately obvious to anyone who's watched my videos on Zelda before, because apparently that's all I can talk about when it comes to that franchise. Anything that messes with the weather can have potentially devastating consequences to the local environment. Hail creates a literal, actual hailstorm that changes the local weather. Now, there are several moves that change the weather to something, but to create hail, you need a lot of wind and water, which means it would likely involve higher pressure changes in the local climate than another move like, say, Sunny Day. Plus, you know, there's hail to deal with. Aeroblast is interesting because it's a pressure blast based move, which I've covered before. The TLDR with pressure differences is that in order to do something like cause actual physical damage to someone, the pressure differential needs to be incredibly high and close together, which usually means you need something like a bomb to go off to create an air pressure wave strong enough to injure someone. Magnitude should speak for itself. It's an earthquake. Boom. The end. Why not the move Earthquake? Well, simple. Magnitude actually has a listed magnitude randomly selected for the move, and it's potentially more damaging than Earthquake by power level. And this is as good an opportunity as any to talk about Fissure. It was originally on my short list, but got removed because the physics of fissures in the ground are, well, actually pretty boring. They don't need earthquakes to form, and while they can be dangerous to anybody in the immediate vicinity humanity and could be potentially devastating if used near the load-bearing wall of a skyscraper, the danger of fissure is far too situational and not at all guaranteed to be fatal to one person, let alone thousands like a magnitude 10 earthquake definitely is. Sheer cold is interesting because, like fissure, it's an instant KO if it hits the opponent, and its method of action is super interesting. Its description says it hits the opponent with a blast of absolute zero air. The biomechanics of cardiac arrest due to thermal shock are actually pretty interesting, and I could not pass the opportunity to research whether absolute zero, the temperature at which molecular vibrations that we know as heat ceases, could have potentially devastating effects when weaponized. The next handful are kind of clumped together, and I had to look at them in detail. Spatial Rend harms opponents by warping space-time. Roar of Time damages opponents by warping time, which is like literally the exact same thing as space according to Einstein, but whatever. Black Hole Eclipse needs no introduction because, I mean, it probably creates a black hole. So there's that. In Continental Crush, I mean, well, I'll let it speak for itself. Just look at it. Any questions? Okay, so we have our list. Let's start crossing things off of it. Sheer cold is the first to go. Absolute zero, if it's even actually achievable, wouldn't cause that much lasting damage outside the immediate area. Given that the medium of transmission is air, the cold molecules would just disperse out and warm up. Boring. Darn. Next. Aeroblast is pretty fascinating, actually. Blast overpressure, the pressure differences created by bombs going off, has been studied in great detail by, the military. Data from the Department of Defense has several peak pounds per square inch, or PSI, overblast pressure differences recorded with their effects. Now, since Aeroblast isn't necessarily fatal, it's likely a 3 PSI blast, which would create winds of over 100 miles per hour or 160 kilometers per hour. Basically what happens is if something big explodes, it pushes air molecules together near the blast radius. This is sometimes called the Mach effect because this kind of pressure wave is created by any object moving in a fluid faster than the speed of sound. This moves out as a wall of pressure from the blast, dissipating as it goes and washing over objects in its way. This peak in pressure can hit you, greatly increasing the pressure on your body by the surrounding air and then greatly dropping it down again. This causes all sorts of shear stress to your organs and can straight up kill you. Fun! Now, a lot of this has to do with how far away you are, but to create pressure waves of this magnitude, you need to set off a bomb with the explosive force of approximately half a ton of TNT, which we can determine with some helpful charts and graphs from the Department of Defense. So this is the benchmark that we need to top. To which we get to my favorite, Continental Crush, a move that pulls bedrock out of the ground, pushes it into one giant freaking mountain, and drops it on the head of your opponent. That's basically my instinct when I find one of those creepy as hell house centipedes, which, fun fact, are also called 100-legged, which I think is supposed to be cute, but instead makes them more horrifying to me. Easily more terrifying than any enemy in Bloodborne. What was I talking about? Oh, right, crushing your enemies with a giant mountain of rock. This one is awesome. Doing some basic back-of-the-napkin math, we can estimate this mountain of rock has a width of 100 meters and an internal volume of 523,598 cubic meters. We can measure this more closely if we need a tiebreaker later, but this will do for now. Given that the density of bedrock is 2,630 kilograms per cubic meter, this gives our mountain a mass of over 1.3 billion kilograms. Woohoo, yeah! But as you can see, it's just dropped. It's not a giant asteroid falling from the sky, which still gives our Aeroblast a chance. Dropped from a height of about 50 meters and accelerating at 9.8 meters per second toward the ground under the influence of gravity, this big ball of rock would hit the ground at over 30 meters per second, or over 65 miles per hour. Okay, we're getting a little scary now. At a height of 50 meters, an object of this mass would have 674,761,742,113.53 joules of potential energy, and due to the laws of conservation of energy, this is the energy that it would be hitting the ground with. Proven with this formula, and that is, let's check, the same amount of energy consumed by a human adult over 80 years? What? That... Okay, Wikipedia, someday we're gonna have to have a talk about some of the examples you've chosen for your orders of magnitude pages. Okay, so let's try something else. How many tons of TNT is the... Oh my god. 161,000 tons of TNT released in a fraction of a second?
nope, we have a new frontrunner. That is more powerful than a W-76 nuclear warhead. You know that bomb that Trump dropped on Afghanistan, the mother of all bombs, the largest conventional bomb used to date? Yeah, this is 61 of those things. Oh my God, no. Calm down, Austin. Don't yell. Breathe. Impact force of this thing could level an entire city. And this isn't even a move that's limited to like one Pokemon. A ton of Pokemon can learn this thing. This is like leaving atom bombs laying around for random 10-year-olds to pick up the keys to. Then again, that is Bethesda's entire business model with Fallout 76, so maybe they're onto something there. So, okay, just off the bat, I'm scratching off Hail, Aeroblast, Roar of Time, and Spatial Rend off the list. Just no way those things can do anything even remotely as bad as that. So that leaves Magnitude and Black Hole Eclipse, or whatever the hell it's called. Great. So one Earthquake and one move that gently lifts an opponent into the air. Spooky. All right, so Magnitude first then. This one is a bit tricky to draw conclusions on. It's a move that randomly selects a magnitude between 1 and 10 and deals damage based on whatever number it spits out. If, and yes, this is a big if, they're leaning on real-world magnitude systems like the moment magnitude scale, which is what's used nowadays in place of the Richter scale. These numbers are logarithmic, meaning that a magnitude 10 earthquake isn't 10 times stronger than a magnitude 1 earthquake, it's 31.6 trillion times stronger. And if this is based on the moment magnitude scale and you happen to roll a 10, boy, this thing is serious. The rock from Continental Crush, our nuclear bomb rock, 674 gigajoules of energy. This earthquake, it would be unlike anything we've ever seen before. 1.23 billion gigajoules. We are talking cataclysmic death. This would be a mega thrust earthquake stronger than any that's ever occurred on our planet before. In Valdivia, Chile, on May 22nd, 1960, an earthquake of moment magnitude 9.5 shook the entire freaking Earth. Between the local devastation caused in Chile and the tsunami that ravaged Hawaii, death tolls as high as 7,000 and damages to infrastructure totaled over $6 billion in today's money. I think while that would release more energy, it's hard to say what's a higher cause of death between this and the rock that would hit the ground and explode like a nuke. So all we have to do now is rule out this black hole move that would probably just evaporate harmlessly into Hawking radiation, and we can reach our conclusions, and I'll have made it through this entire episode without losing it. Alright, so with a gravitational pull that barely overpowers the local gravity and gently lifts Pokemon up, this would be a gravitational body of... Oh. Okay, well that's pretty massive. 3 times the mass of Churyumov Gerasimenko into this tiny black hole. That is... Okay, well, wait a minute. Small black holes decay due to Hawking radiation, no problem. So this one, according to Hawking's theories, would, damn it, 119 million years to decay? Yeah! That means that... No. Stay calm, Austin. Stay... This thing would fall to the ground like any massive object would. It'd hit the ground with a force that'd make you wish that someone had dropped a giant mountain on your head. That ain't even the worst thing. Everything it came into contact with would be sucked into its epicenter, unable to escape as they accelerated toward the center of this black hole, needing an escape velocity faster than the speed of light to escape it. As it ate up matter it came into contact with, it'd be pulled toward the center of our planet as it drilled through everything in its way and eventually reaching our core. Then slowly, ever so slowly, but absolutely terrifyingly, the entire planet would collapse into itself and begin to spin massively as it did so, killing everyone on Earth. Energy can be neither created nor destroyed, so you know what would happen if an object this massive, a black hole like this, actually evaporated into Hawking radiation? Key mother side-ducking word being radiation? It would release all the photons at once that it would normally release slowly over 119 million years. A quadrillion joules of light energy. Just BAM! in seconds. That's over 40 minutes of the total output energy from the sun from all angles. The whole thing released in seconds. It would be Armageddon to the planet Earth. The entire Earth might be split into pieces as a radiation wave of literally astronomical proportions burst out like a microwave oven of death. Why, Game Freak? Why do you do this to me? And why are you giving children access to black holes? I'm gonna go call my therapist now. Sincerely, Austin.
Everything I can is so real. Like the snapshots all that you were told. It's not in my head. It's behind your mask. I can't take this place. The great deception. It's not in my head. It's behind your mask. I can't take this place. The great deception.
Hi, it's me, Austin, and I'm here to accomplish two very important things today. One, find out where all the starter Pokemon are, and two, finally make peace with all the Bulbasaur fans who are still mad that I omitted Bulbasaur from the list of Gen 1 starters when Matt and I deadlocked over a year ago by making this entire episode about Bulbasaur. Okay, well, that's technically not true because this episode is actually about all starter Pokemon, not just Bulbasaur, but almost all of them share the exact same mechanics when it comes to what I'm talking about today, from Gen 1 all the way to Gen... now. Okay, so they did slightly change in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, but only slightly and not in a way that really matters for this episode. So you can sub in any starters from any game and it will still be relevant today. But today, we're gonna use Bulbasaur because I'm a Gen 1er and they're cute for a frog with a plant growing out of it. Anyway, as a Gen 1er who has been playing since the original games were first released in the United States, I have been obsessed with finding out why starter Pokemon are so rare. I mean, like, in my head, I know it's because it's a game mechanic where they have to make the first Pokemon you get feel special to you and not make it any run-of-the-mill garbage rat you can find 10 minutes after stepping outside your front door, but that part in the Pokedex where it says Area Unknown haunted me. In a world filled with rumors of Mews being able to be caught behind the truck near the SS and what was it? The uncle of a friend of yours in school said if you could just get behind Bill's house, you could catch every rare Pokemon in the game and get infinite EVs or something. Anyway, it was a young internet and none of us quite realized that anybody could write just about anything on game sages with little to no repercussions, and rumors about secret areas where you could find all the starters if you just completed the right steps remained chiseled into my brain for years after I stopped playing Pokemon regularly. Someday, I'd break into Bill's secret garden and find tall grass filled with Charmanders and Squirtles, and that Area Unknown entry in the Pokedex would finally disappear, and I'd get to have the ultimate answer to the rock, paper, scissors dilemma that Oak forces upon you within the very first minutes of the game. But alas, the rumors were just lies. Aside from some very specific exploits and hacks, once you pick your starter and your rival picks theirs, you will never run into any other Pokemon of that species again. That is, until the breeding mechanic was introduced in Generation 2. And it's here where the burning question in the back of my mind came rocketing back into my imagination. Starter Pokemon are, of course, breedable if you locate a Ditto, but what's more interesting is, with the breeding mechanics, Game Freak introduced an entirely new design component into their games that simultaneously raises more questions, but also itself begins to answer the question that has haunted me for over 20 years. Why are starter Pokemon so rare? Because they're going extinct. And how do I know this? Because of sex. I'm talking about biological sex here, not the act of sexual intercourse, even though that presumably has a role to play here, which I am not going to get into.
I'm moving, but I'm
I said I wasn't going to get into it. Okay. For the sake of time, we're gonna skip over sexless Pokemon and say that in order to breed a Pokemon, you either need to have two Pokemon of the same species who are different sexes, or a Pokemon from the same egg group, whereupon the offspring from the breeding will be the species of the female Pokemon, or you need a Ditto who can morph into anything. Okay, got it? Good. Because of this, Pokemon need to have a sex assigned to them by the game. So when a Pokemon appears, the game just flips a coin to figure out whether it's male or female, right? Well, no. For the majority of Pokemon, approximately 56.24%, yes, this would be correct. Over a long enough timeline, most breedable Pokemon will have one female for every one male. This is what's known as a sex ratio. And for most animals and Pokemon, it is 1-to-1. It's hard to get exact numbers, but somewhere in the upper 90s of percents of animals on Earth have a sex ratio of 1-to-1, meaning for every male, there's one female. We will get into why that is in a bit, but what's important is that this is incredibly common, and what's more interesting is that starter Pokemon, they do not fall within this 56.24% of Pokemon with a 1-to-1 sex ratio. Starter Pokemon, all of them have a sex ratio of 7-to-1 males to females, meaning that for every one female Pokemon born, 7 males are born. And it turns out that this can have disastrous consequences to the population of a species. Before we get into explaining why having 0.1429 females born for every male can doom a species to extinction, I think we first have to go over why this 1-to-1 ratio is so freaking common in nature to begin with, even among populations where only a few males actually get to breed with a multitude of females, what's known as polygyny. Examples include gorillas, elephant seals, and high schools. And believe it or not, we do have an answer, and it boils down to a simple combination of mathematics and evolutionary science. So let's take a population of Bulbasaurs and for the sake of argument say that the sex ratio were reversed, 7 females per 1 male. That means that the average male Bulbasaur would get to mate 7 times more frequently than the average female. If each Bulbasaur has 1 egg, that means that the male's genes get passed down 7 times more than a female's genes would, all else being equal. But one of our Bulbasaurs got hit by space radiation and mutated, and now it produces more males than females. All of a sudden, the children of this one Bulbasaur would have a tremendous genetic edge in the population, having a bunch of dudes that can spread its genes, which means the male dominating gene would spread like wildfire until it got so prevalent that it was no longer an advantage and it was just the status quo. Now, all of a sudden, a mutation that produces more females than males gets an advantage and tips the scales the other way. And then this evolutionary trade-off goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, getting smaller and smaller each time until finally it settles at around a 1-to-1 ratio. This will almost always happen unless a skewed sex ratio provides a definite evolutionary advantage, like the Adactylinium genus of mites that have boiled down efficient breeding to a hard, calculated science. I will spare you the details, but they have a ratio of 5 to 8 females per every male, and the Wikipedia page is, well, you can look it up for yourself. It is gross and awesome. So what does this have to do with Bulbasaur and the other starters? Well, quite a bit once you start to dig into the breeding mechanics. You see, one of the main issues with having a skewed sex ratio is that your species can become incredibly susceptible to changes in the ecosystem. Usually for a ratio other than 1-to-1 to stabilize, that means that a species is either relying on some weird behavioral quirk or some specific environmental factor that makes this method of procreation optimal. And when you're that dependent upon outside elements or precarious conditions to breed, sudden changes to your environment can sometimes happen too fast for evolution to have a chance to respond, and you just die out because nobody's making babies fast enough to replace the corpses that are piling up. Just ask the giant pandas, and you know who's great at causing massive changes to the environment? Humans. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. In order to get a solid grasp over how Pokemon breeding would work in the wild, I created a simulation in Python that used all the well-documented breeding data of Pokemon to create fake populations for comparison. Pokemon are
Well, the technical term is fecund. Every 255 to 257 steps, depending upon a generation, if you have Pokemon in the Pokemon daycare, the game runs a check versus a few different factors. And if they're met, it runs a probability check that an egg is laid, which can be anywhere from 20 to 88%. If an egg is laid, you can pick it up and your Pokemon can be immediately ready to lay another egg in 255 to 257 steps. Pokemon occurs in real time, given that it's tied to real-world day-night cycles, and each step takes about 0.2 seconds, meaning a fertile Pokemon will lay, on average, 840 viable eggs per day. Fecund! This 255 to 257 step period is something we're going to call a tick, and it's how I calculated all my fertility comparisons. Pokemon eggs hatch based on how many steps you take too, and for 55% of Pokemon species, eggs hatch in 20 ticks. Got it? Good. So basically, I coded a math machine with probabilities and, importantly, a death rate. I pulled a death rate from another fecund animal species, the eastern cottontail rabbit, which has an average mortality rate of 80% over a year. I boiled this down to a number of ticks. Since the average rabbit litter is 5 rabbits and Pokemon only lay 1 egg, this becomes an 80% mortality rate per 65 ticks. This is in the wild, mind you, and given the rate at which I murdered Pokemon when grinding levels, that checks out. So, okay, I plugged all of this into my code, which, I mean, okay, if you follow me on Twitter, I will link the GitHub when this video goes live, but you have to promise, okay? You promise not to mock me for the parts of my code that are not Pythonic, okay? Promise me! I'm sorry, okay? I was in a rush! I wanted to see if a species that had 7 males per every 1 female would be totally boned given they have litters of 1 egg at a time. Is this even viable if all things are perfect? Yes. Yes, it is, believe it or not, but the first inklings of weakness appeared really early on. In the very, very early stages, when populations were small, there was a slim but non-zero chance that all the females would die, and all the eggs that they managed to lay before they died would all hatch males, which would render a species extinction guaranteed if there were no Dittos nearby. So the cracks are already starting to show. So the population is viable. Great! And to cover my bases, I ran simulations on Rattatas and Litleos too. Rattatas have a 1-to-1 ratio, and Litleo is the only Pokemon species with a 7-to-1 female to male ratio. Okay, can I get those graphs to scale though? Ha! That's better. I can barely see poor Bulbasaur down there, but that's fine. Nobody said they needed to be the most numerous species. Quality over quantity, right? However, how would our Bulbasaur population fare if we introduced anything at all that impacted just the fertility rates? Not a new predator that's killing them more frequently, not less food, just something that disrupts their ability to breed as efficiently. Think of it as your parent knocking on your door during puberty. I built into my model a drop in fertility that occurs a little over a year into the growth of a population to see what happens. Here's the Litleo population. All right, seems good. Little hiccup here, but overall, everything is pretty good. Here's Rattatas. Oh, they don't even care. And now our starter Pokemon population. Doing okay. Doing okay. Doing... Oh no, no. Oh, no, 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 no! They're extinct! But why? Well, because there's so much risk concentrated into one sex, and it's the sex that creates eggs. The reason the reverse ratio has almost no problems at all is because if like a bunch of egg fertilizers die off and don't get to breed, it's not that big of a deal. There's still plenty of egg makers, and one egg fertilizer can, if he's prolific and has a high charisma score, fertilize every female in a species. In fact, Pokemon stacks the deck even further, because even if all the males of a species dies through some horrible bad luck, the species can still breed with a male from the same egg group. So the obliteration of a species really requires that all the females die, which is what makes this 1-to-7 female to male ratio so cataclysmically damning. If anything shows up that makes this delicate balance of food, resources, and mates no longer work, species with either more females than males or an equal number can easily take the punches in stride and work to adapt to the changing climate. It may be a struggle, but they will at least have one less thing to worry about when it comes to breeding. But species like Bulbasaur and the other starters, they are totally screwed. If something sudden happens that permanently alters the breeding conditions, like, I don't know, decreased grasslands for privacy, more spaced out breeding grounds, or increased lighting at night, their species will be long dead before a random mutation has time to show up and give them a chance to adapt to the new environment. And who is really, really good at dramatically and permanently altering environments in ways that impact local wildlife? Humans. This isn't some hippy-dippy observation. This is just an objective, observable fact. Humans, as a body, are amazing at changing the world around them to suit their needs. Agriculture, diverting rivers, and yes, even lights at night can cause whole species to go extinct. There is a direct positive correlation between the human population and the number of species that go extinct. Even something as simple as electronic lighting can tremendously disrupt the behaviors of nocturnal animals by turning nighttime into daytime. And on evolutionary timelines, these advances are super new. Evolution can take thousands of years to adapt to new environments, and animals that rely on millions of years of predictability can be thrown for a loop when one human goes, hey, what if I invented the light bulb, and 20 years later, bam, light everywhere, and now baby sea turtles are like, where do I go? I'm supposed to follow the moon, but the moon is literally everywhere. And just like real life, there are some species in the Pokemon universe that basically don't care and are barely impacted, and others, like Bulbasaur, they're practically nowhere to be found. The only examples we can find in-game are in captivity, which means even though they don't say it, what Professor Oak and the other Professor Trees are actually doing is conservation. They're trying to save a dying species from total annihilation, which, you know, seems like maybe handing them out to 10-year-olds maybe isn't the best idea, or maybe it is, I don't know. We can release a hell of a lot of Pokemon into the wild while we're grinding for shiny Pokemon with perfect IVs. So, what does this mean? It means that, well, Bulbasaur actually is special. It's one of the last of a handful of its species, a species of Pokemon that can now only survive in captivity. Even if you take the anime canon as true that there are breeding farms and preserves for starter Pokemon, this does not debunk this idea that starter Pokemon can only thrive under very controlled conditions and are one natural disaster away from total annihilation, all because of humanity. So, you know, cherish your starter Pokemon. They really are one of a kind. And, you know, find a Ditto and breed that thing like crazy, because just like the giant pandas in China, we desperately need these Pokemon to fuck. Sincerely, Austin. Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. Are you wondering why it's dark, why I'm skipping the normal intro? It's because I'm in hiding. From what? From them. The ones who hunt us, that feed on our fear and our lifeblood. Have you ever seen a Jigglypuff drink water, Mandrake? Oh no. Oh, it's here. Oh, run! Run! Ah! Okay, I'm here, we're doing this. I got out alive, just barely. Today, we're talking about what is probably the most dangerous Pokemon in the entire Pokedex. Say it with me now, Alcremie. What? Well, what's wrong? You don't believe me? You think I'm memeing right now that this is some sort of big goof? You haven't seen what I have seen, but you will. By the time I'm done, you will have the fear in your heart for this Pokemon too. Now, I may be exaggerating slightly. There may be Pokemon with higher kill counts out there, but I think Alcremie can hold its own against all but the most powerful Pokemon.
Now, I'm researching this and writing this before Sword and Shield actually comes out, and it's getting edited after it comes out, so there won't really be any spoilers, but hopefully nothing in the game contradicts me. I don't think it will, unless the Pokedex literally says something like, "This is the most harmless Pokemon ever known to exist." In which case, I will know for a fact that the hashtag Pastel Aesthetic Gang got to the professors in charge of writing the Pokedex entry, and they are in need of rescuing by me. Okay, I'm gonna calm down now because I've probably left a lot of you behind. How could this Pokemon, this thing right here that literally looks like a big old pile of frosting, possibly be dangerous? And before we actually answer that with science, we have to go over a bit of the lore first. Like I said before, I don't have access to the Pokedex right now since Alcremie is a new Pokemon that's being introduced in the most recent Pokemon game, Pokemon Sword and Shield, and it's the latest iteration in the list of Pokemon that Gen 1ers look at, shake their heads and lament, "Back in my day, Pokemon wasn't full of such nonsense. Game Freak must be running out of ideas." To which I say, Geodude is literally a rock, Execute is literally just a pile of eggs, and Mr. Mime? Man, I'm really abusing the cutaway gag in this video. Whatever, it makes mixing the music easier. Anyway, you're not supposed to see this part of the video. Point is, Pokemon has always been kinda dumb and had weird entries in it. Although, granted, unless you count Taurus, none of them have been actual literal food like Cherubi, Cherim, Swirlix, Slurlpuff, Game Freakin' Vanillite's entire evolutionary line, and of course, Alcremie. This earns a bit of disdain from 100-year-old millennials like me, but that's because we simply lack the imagination to understand the sheer power and horror behind these Pokemon that exist solely, entirely to hunt and kill us in our sleep. Oh, you think I'm joking? I am deadly serious. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The existence of these Pokemon seems ridiculous at first glance, but they actually make a great deal of sense within the context of the Pokemon universe. Instead of being ridiculous, on the contrary, they make a heck of a lot more sense than a lot of other Pokemon. Why? Because they are displaying a very common evolutionary trait that we see a lot in the real world: mimicry. You're familiar with mimicry. It's why walking sticks look like actual sticks, or the actually harmless Mexican milk snake that looks almost indistinguishable from the very deadly Texas coral snake. Speaking of snakes, there's also the larval form of the Hemeroplanus triptylemus moth that looks almost exactly like a pit viper and will actually mock strike at potential predators in order to scare them away. These are all examples of mimicry, an evolutionary phenomenon that is utterly fascinating to me. There's several different types of mimicry in the wild. The ones I listed above are examples of Batesian mimicry, where a harmless mimic poses as something harmful. There's also Mullerian mimicry, where a harmful species wears a billboard in order to signal to the world not to mess with it. There are other categories as well, but they're not as important for what we're talking about today. These are examples of defensive mimicry, and the way they occur in nature is utterly fascinating. It happens the same way any evolutionary adaptation happens. A small mutation occurs when cells divide during procreation. If that mutation makes it easier to survive, you're more likely to spread your genes, which spreads the mutation around. Accidentally got some yellow and black stripes? Guess what? Everyone's gonna think you're a wasp now. Congratulations, because you get to do anything you want because everyone thinks you're a freaking wasp. Now all your kids are gonna look like wasps, and your genes get a huge evolutionary advantage in the gene pool. Of course, this process is very slow, especially when it comes to perfectly mimicking predators. A bit of camouflage can happen in maybe a few generations, but shaping your entire butt to look like a snake, developing a harmless strike instinct to sell the facade, that takes an extraordinarily long time for natural selection to shape into being, but it can and does happen because nature is amazing and horrific at the same time. Humans have even caused this by mistake. Rye was originally a weed that evolved to look like wheat so it wouldn't get ripped out of our farms. Ha! Joke's on you, Rye. We're gonna eat you and make whiskey out of you anyway. Pranked! We will eat and drink anything. We're not scared of you. Just some plant. Which brings us back to Pokemon and these things. And actually, you know what? Let's back up to Generation 1. Voltorb. I always hated this Pokemon as a kid. You guys literally just made a Pokemon that looks like a Pokeball. Okay, these things are an example of a whole different kind of mimicry. What we mentioned before, that was defensive mimicry. This is aggressive mimicry, predacious mimicry. I first encountered these Pokemon in the dilapidated power plant by picking up what I thought was an item, but it turned out to be a freaking sentient hand grenade. It's these jerks that are actually the key to everything, the missing link between Alcremie and Vanillite and the rest of the Pokedex. We don't get elucidation into the origins of Voltorb until Pokemon Silver, whereupon the Pokedex says it was discovered when Pokeballs were introduced. It is said that there is some connection. And then Ruby elaborates that it was first sighted in a building that manufactured Pokeballs. Some of the Pokedex entries speculate that Voltorb actually is a sentient Pokeball come to life a la Frankenstein's monster, but I don't think that's the case. I think that it is a Pokemon that evolved to resemble something harmless. In order to do what? Kill humans. That's what they do when you try to pick them up. They'll either attack you, electrocute you, or explode. And what does this have to do with Alcremie? Everything. Voltorb establishes two very important facts. One, Pokemon will evolve mimicry in order to hunt humans, and two, they can evolve incredibly quickly. I'm not sure if this is Ditto or Mew related, but Pokemon can adapt to changing stimuli in the environment incredibly fast. Voltorb, of course, isn't unique in being an ambush predator. Tons of Pokemon do this. Chandelure comes to mind, but Voltorb closes a gap on the time it takes, i.e. almost no time at all. Presumably in a generation or two, this is very quick, and this is why we have to circle back to Alcremie and Vanillite, because fine, ambush predators exist, that makes sense, but what makes these Pokemon so dangerous? Because they are highly specialized for one thing: murder. You see, Voltorbs and Electrodes are just as likely to be left alone as a piece of garbage, maybe an old broken Pokeball. Who would even want that? Their mimicry is just as likely to be defensive as it is also aggressive, but these cream puff monsters, these things clearly exist only to kill. Aggressive mimicry usually means that whatever evolved these characteristics has a very specialized skill set. Ant spiders are spiders that look like ants and can clone pheromones in order to invade ant society in order to eat ants without being bothered. The orchid mantis disguises itself like a flower so it can kill and eat butterflies and bees. Venus flytraps are like, look at me, don't I look delicious? I definitely am a flower, you guys. And then they eat whatever dumb bug flies into them. What do all these mimics have in common? They have a very specialized job hunting a very narrow range of prey. They aren't exactly Renaissance animals that adapted to a wide range of prey groups. They were like, if I do this one thing really, really well, I can eat something every day. It means that aggressive mimicry, especially when it's so specific as to look just like another thing that already exists, it tells you a lot about the sort of prey that are targets. So tell me, if an ant spider dresses up like an ant to kill ants, or an orchid mantis dresses up like an orchid, aka butterfly food, in order to kill butterflies, what exactly is a Pokemon that dresses like literal, actual candy hunting for food? I'll give you a hint. Us! It is hunting us, it is after us and our children! And I tell you what, once you realize this, that pretty much the instant the first ice cream shop was opened and some Ditto or whatever was like, hey, if I look like a puff pastry, they'll just like walk right up to me and I'll eat every day, and then blam, new apex predator in the house. It really makes you worry about the weaponized cuteness of Sylveon and its tendrils that can literally read minds, or Blissey eggs that can make you docile if you eat them. We already have documentation that Jellicent is the exact sort of monster that intentionally lures people to their deaths. Pokemon are hunting us, meaning all those hashtag aesthetic teams you're building filled with pastel goths are actually like the most dangerous teams of Pokemon that want more than anything to eat your flesh and turn it into nutrients so they can take over the world. Or maybe they're just a normal predator and don't have any aspirations for world domination. Does make you wonder what Jigglypuff does once it sings its victims to sleep though, which I mean, maybe I wouldn't mind. After researching this episode, I haven't slept. It's been days since I slept, afraid of Pokemon, which aren't real. My bad, never mind. Sincerely, Austin. Subscribe to the channel. Hi, it's me, Austin, etc. etc. Oh, what am I? Am I not enthusiastic enough? Sorry, I am really tired. I just got over being sick with some sort of stomach thing, so I'm avoiding caffeine because it can do wonky things to your digestive tract. Last thing I need is a diuretic right now, but I am here. I'm sharp. My bowels are empty and my mind is clear. So, speaking of being sick, let's talk about viruses. Specifically, the Pokeballs virus in Pokemon. This is something that's been on my radar for a while, and it wasn't actually my idea. It was an idea given to me by YouTuber Tierzu years ago, because that dude did microbiology in college, and that's where his brain goes, apparently. Anyway, I'm finally gonna do it now because I wanna, so thanks for the free idea, Tier. Or is it Mr. Zoo? Nah, whatever. So first of all, what is the Pokeballs? It is a virus, probably. The lore isn't that clear on whether it's actually a virus or not, but it is a microorganism of some kind. It's contagious, passing from Pokemon to Pokemon. If one of your Pokemon has it, there is a small chance that it will pass to another Pokemon in your party. A Pokemon can very rarely, like 3 in 65,536 times, catch it after a battle ends. That is a 0.0046% chance of catching it in the wild. This means that it's either not highly contagious, which is likely, or it's highly rare, which is also likely, or it's both, which is, you know, extremely likely. Anyway, for context, the chances of encountering a shiny Pokemon is 1 in 8,192, or about 0.012%, making finding a shiny Pokemon over 2.5 times more likely than catching the Pokeballs, which is good, right? Less chances of getting a Pokemon virus? Well, no, that is actually terrible news. Why? Because the Pokeballs freakin rules! A Pokemon that catches the Pokeballs gains effort values at a doubled rate, which, in order to understand what the heck that means, I'm gonna have to explain EV training. No, Tanya, not EV training, EV training. Good grief. Okay, so let's take a random Pokemon. Actually, yeah, no, let's make it actually random. I'm gonna use randompokemon.com to give me something actually completely random. Come on, big money, no whammies, and I got Cofagrigus. All right, hold on. I literally have no idea what this Pokemon is. Just give me a sec. Okay, it was introduced in Gen 5, evolves from Yamask at level 34. Pokedex entry says, it has been said that they swallow those who get too close and turn them into mummies. They like to eat gold nuggets. They pretend to be elaborate coffins to teach lessons to grave robbers. Their bodies are covered in pure gold. Grave robbers who mistake them for real coffins and get too close end up trapped inside their bodies. There are many depictions of Cofagrigus decorating ancient tombs. They're symbols of the wealth that kings of bygone eras had. Neat! Good stuff. All right, so, where were we? Oh, right, EV training. Okay. Cofagrigus. Let's take a look at an average level 100 Cofagrigus. We're going to ignore IVs for y'all who are super into this. This is not an EV training guide. Cool your jets a little bit. Okay, so at level 100, Cofagrigus will have 6 stats: HP, attack, defense, special defense, and speed, with values of 226, 94, 265, 175, 193, and 58 respectively. Just at a glance, you can assume a few things. Cofagrigus has high health, high resistance to physical attacks, packs a punch like a me, and is reasonably strong at attacking with essentially Pokemon magical attacks. Also, it's just overall pretty resilient. So at level 100, this is the best that our Cofagrigus can get, right? Well, there's no more levels to be gained, ergo there's no possible way to improve this Pokemon's stats. Wrong. Dead wrong. This is where EV training comes in. EV training, short for effort value training, is a way of improving your Pokemon stats without being shackled to the leveling system. Yeah, leveling your Pokemon does increase their stats, but you can push them even further than that. You may have experienced this a little with Pokemon vitamins, which will instantly and permanently boost a stat for essentially free, but these do have a limit. You can only use vitamins to increase stats by a total of 100, which is already pretty impressive. It means you can theoretically boost any stat stat by 100. You can take that paltry 94 attack and turn it into a 194 attack, making your Pokemon more well-rounded, or you can boost the defense from 265 to 365, making something that was already formidable against physical attacks nearly impenetrable. But this is just scratching the surface of the min-maxing that's possible in the Pokemon games, which brings us back to effort values. Effort values were the system that was put in place in Pokemon. Well, a lot of people say that it was introduced in Ruby and Sapphire, but some form of it has existed in the Pokemon games going all the way back to Generation 1. But the system there was way more complicated and less fun. Anyway, in the current system, you can boost your stats by way more than this initial 100 from vitamins. By how much? Over 500 total. 510 to be exact. So how do you get this extra 410 points after shoving a bunch of pills in your Pokemon? By fighting other Pokemon. Let's pit our Cofagrigus against another, let's use our randomizer again. Okay, so we're in a Pokemon battle and a wild Baniri has appeared. Excellent. Cofagrigus, use Hyper Beam. What, you think, what, it's overkill? Just do it! I'm the Pokemon master here. Nuke it with Hyper Beam!
お前はもう死んでいる。何?
Okay, we've knocked out Baniri. Nice. I'm sure there will be no consequences to putting a wild animal in a coma surrounded by its natural predators after zapping it with a laser beam. Battle's over and boom, we've gained an effort value point. 1 to be precise. According to Bulbapedia, Baniris are worth 1 effort value point in the speed stat, meaning each one we kill, knock out, our Cofagrigus will gain 1 point to their speed stat. And that's it. That is EV training. You can boost a Pokemon stats by over 500 points just by playing the game. There's an entire list of Pokemon out there with different effort value rewards, so just find a place with a ton of Pokemon in it that have the stat you want to grind and begin the mass extermination. Let's take our hypothetical Cofagrigus with his base stats and up them to 240 HP, 94 attack, 427 defense, 317 special attack, 339 special defense, and 104 speed, making them a literal tank, thick as heck armor with a cannon strapped to its head. All of this accomplished through EV training and basically doubles the potential power of any given Pokemon. And what does this have to do with Pokerus? Everything. Pokerus has one single side effect that we know of. It doubles the EVs Pokemon receive from battle, making it a highly prized infection among the world's most serious Pokemon trainers, essentially halving the amount of time they have to spend EV training otherwise. That Baniri from earlier that only gave me 1 speed point, now it gives 2, and that's it. That's everything you need to know. And the thing is, as Tirzu pointed out to me ages ago, this makes no freaking sense. A contagious disease that is purely beneficial and is purely a virus? Really? That cannot possibly be possible, can it? Well, let's find out, because the answer may surprise you. Interestingly, beneficial viruses do exist. They're known as mutualistic viruses. And the more you know about the microcosmos of your body, the less surprising this should be. Between 1 to 3% of your body is actually not you. It's other things, other creatures you're carrying around with you. Meaning if you weigh 170 pounds like I do, hashtag dadbods unite, as much as 5 pounds of your body is viruses, bacteria, and fungi living on you and in you. Most of them are utterly harmless, and several of them are actually beneficial. Bacteria plays a key role in mammal digestion, for example, helping to break down things in your intestines into more easily absorbed forms. Things you're eating that would otherwise just pass through you are turned into useful materials by the things living inside you. This is why going on rounds of antibiotics can give you severe indigestion. It will literally wipe out the beneficial mutualistic bacteria in your gut, making your food harder to digest. What's more, this bacteria in your gut doesn't just eat your food, they also reduce the chances of infection in your body, either by starving out other organisms that would use your waste to multiply and produce an infection or a toxic upspike in chemicals, or outright eating harmful bacteria. bacteria. But why don't you always get super sick with an antibiotic-resistant infection every time you go on antibiotics? Because that's where viruses come in. When antibiotics kill off the beneficial bacteria in your gut, this allows viruses to thrive. Specifically, viruses known as bacteriophages, which are viruses that prey on bacteria. These things are everywhere, and they literally could not care less about your health. What they care about is replicating, and they do it very well. Usually, phages are adapted to prey on very specific bacteria, meaning they'll leave things like your beneficial bacteria in your guts alone, because they've just not adapted to attack them. But when the bacteria that have been keeping harmful bacteria at bay suddenly gets wiped off the face of the earth from antibiotics, this becomes an all-you-can-eat buffet to those bacteriophages, and they will go to town, inserting their biological information into these bacteria that would turn your body into a living war zone, replicating inside them and exploding out by the millions to infect and kill more. A huge spike in viral bacteriophages has been documented in patients that go on strong antibiotics, and it's a large reason why antibiotics presently don't immediately kill us due to malnutrition, secondary infections, or spikes in toxins. Pretty cool stuff. So what, the Pokerus is just a bacteriophage that lives in the Pokemon gut flora? Well, nah, probably not. For one thing, these phages have no noticeable symptoms, positive or negative, on our bodies. They just maintain the status quo. And what's more, they're not really contagious. You don't catch them from other people or animals. They just kind of exist in you already in small numbers. What's more, in order for bacteriophages to make Pokemon faster, stronger, smarter, and healthier in the way that the Pokerus does, it'd mean there'd have to be some sort of bacteria living inside the Pokemon, which was actively making them dumber and slower and weaker, which I guess is a possibility, but that sounds like a pandemic to me. Someone should look into that. So what, does this mean that the Pokerus is inviable, that it's not a virus and it couldn't exist? Oh, absolutely not. For example, viral infections have been key in evolution in messing with our DNA, and some viruses have been shown to have developmental benefits on rats. This does not explain the Pokerus at all. Nothing on Earth can make things faster, stronger, and smarter. Well, almost nothing natural. But when you get into the world of gene therapy, all bets are off. And what's a key component of gene therapy? Viruses. Using tools like CRISPR, which I can't explain in detail here, gene therapy uses viruses to basically fix DNA. This is because viruses are perfectly adapted for this task. Viruses' entire jam is invading cells and twisting them for our own uses before moving on to another cell and doing the same thing. They can do this by essentially snipping off DNA and replacing it with another floating piece that's nearby. I know it seems like it should be more complicated than that, and it is, but it also kinda isn't. That's how it works. Meaning, while a virus could never randomly evolve to just make Pokemon better, one could be designed to. And it could be designed to be contagious, or it could just happen to be contagious by mistake. Someone drops a vial in a lab, oopsie poopsie, now it's out there. And what's more, gene therapy actually explains everything. Because after the Pokemon cures the Pokerus after a few days, you know what doesn't go away? They're double EVs. That's right, even after a Pokemon has no trace of the virus left in their bodies are still getting the benefits. Meaning it wasn't the actual infection giving them this advantage, rather the infection was unlocking this accelerated growth rate in Pokemon. The Pokerus goes into the body, rewrites all the DNA to allow a Pokemon to grow faster and smarter, and then moves on, or dies. After the DNA is rewritten, there's nothing else to do. But the Pokemon already has its DNA rewritten, so it remains powerful, more capable forever. It's essentially the forced evolutionary virus from Fallout, but it doesn't mutate Pokemon into giant monsters, unfortunately. That would actually rule. So next time when you're out trying to catch the Pokerus, remember, it was designed by some lab somewhere. Probably some lab that made Mewtwo. They're all about gene tampering stuff, and just pray it doesn't evolve into some sort of zombie virus or something that makes your Pokemon want to eat your brains. Sincerely, Austin. Behold incredible drama on today's The Science. He abandoned his family, leaving a poor mom to raise their only child alone for over a decade. Who is he? The mom's been keeping it a secret this entire time, but it ends right here, today, with the blinding truth. The results that you have been waiting for are in. 3 men, 1 child, and 1 overtired YouTuber. Welcome to The Science. What, you're upset about the lack of intro? That's too bad, we're being a little weird today. This is Delia Ketchum, a single mom of 1 from Pallet Town, a small suburb of Viridian City in the Kanto region. Her child, Ash Ketchum, bearing her name, was sent out like all young children are in our world, into the wilderness to make wild animals fight each other for their amusement. To be young again. Delia has been keeping the identity of Ash Ketchum's father a secret for his entire life, and, if we can be meta for a second, over 20 years since the entire franchise was founded. And today is the day when we finally get to the bottom of this massive secret using the powers of math, combinatorics, statistics, genetics, probability, and the almighty square. The day of reckoning is today, Mrs. Ketchum. Today is the day. Dear Nintendo, hi, it's me, Austin. You didn't actually think I'd leave you hanging on the intro, did you? Nah, of course not. Anyway, today we're gonna figure out who Ash's dad is, or if we're being more accurate, who his father of the available candidates probably is, because there are a lot of candidates if we take all of them into account. And while this episode does blur the lines between what is a game theory and what is a film theory and what is a game theory and what is a science, freaking try and stop me. You can't, because the video's already made and it's here, playing. It's done. It's finished. I'm the Lizard King. First, let me introduce you to our already narrowed down candidates for Ash's dad. I did have a lot of help thinning the herd from YouTuber Charu Sharu's video on Ash's father, because there are a lot of dudes who it could have been, and he got me to where I am a lot sooner. Anyway, once I introduce them, then we will move on to the science! In no particular order, there's Professor Oak. This one's fun because he and Ash's mom clearly have something going on in the present canon. We've got motive. The real question is timing and opportunity. The next we got is Bruno, which, man, you know what? If you got Bruno Delia, good job, because that is a slice of a man. An interesting possibility that I would have never considered is Silver. No, Tanya, not that Silver, this Silver. He's the only candidate who only appears in the anime, which is particularly funny because he only shows up in 1 episode, but he is a fan favorite because he shows such a strong connection to Ash, both morally and ethically. But also the guy seems to know who Ash is, in spite of him being kind of a mediocre and forgettable Pokemon trainer. These are our 3 main candidates, and I want you to keep them in the back of your head as we go through these next parts. Okay? Okay, because we're gonna do some science, and by science, I mean our good friend Punnett Squares. Oh yeah, baby! Let's do it! You know, I say our good friend, but I don't think I've ever actually used Punnett Squares on this show before, but they are a ton of fun, and they're going to be our main tool when it comes to analyzing the potential parentage of Ash Ketchum. And since the eyes are the easiest, and we're going to analyze them anyway, let's explain it using our actual situation. In order to understand Punnett Squares, you have to understand 2 words. Well, no, 3. No, actually 5. Well, we're going to leave homozygosity and heterozygosity out of it because, as we're lacking in genetics testing equipment for cartoon and video game characters, we're not gonna know the exact genetic makeup of any of these yahoos. Plus, if we did have that technology, we would just do a paternity test. Where was I? Oh, right, Punnett Squares. Okay, so the first thing you have to know is the difference between a genotype and a phenotype. A phenotype is actually really easy. It's what you actually look like, or rather, it's the expression of your genetics. You have all these genes inside you that make up your different parts, but it's actually your blue eyes, your olive skin, your brown hair that are phenotypes. The next is genotypes, and relatedly, alleles. Genotypes are the actual genetic makeup of a person, and alleles are each 1/2 of that genetic makeup. And let's look at it this way. If you need 2 blue genes, Blue jeans. Sorry, that is really stupid. If you need two blue alleles to mix together in order to have blue eyes, we would illustrate this with two lowercase b's. Each b here is an allele, and together they make the genotype of two genes for blue eyes, or one gene for blue eyes. Well, whatever. Doesn't matter. You get the point. Which together they create the phenotype of blue eyes when someone is actually created and born. The b's in this case are lowercase because blue eyes are considered a recessive trait, which you'll understand more once we get to it, because once you actually see it done, it'll make a lot more sense. Delia Ketchum has the phenotype of brown eyes, which means we know she has at least one capital B allele in her genotype. The problem is brown is a dominant allele over pretty much every other allele out there, meaning we don't really know what her second allele is, so we're just gonna put a question mark up there. This is the first half of our Punnett square. Now, the second half, these are genes from the father, which we also do not have at all. So, 2 question marks here. Now, for this specific model, we're going to use brown, green, and blue alleles, where brown is dominant over green and green is dominant over blue. And in order to understand how these charts work, let's say Delia mates with a blue-eyed male. And let's say we did a genetic test to determine that Delia has a recessive blue allele from a past relative just hanging out there. Using nothing but this square and a tiny bit of math, we can use this limited information to make a pretty good guess of what Delia and Mystery Man's offspring would look like. And our first step is to fill in Delia's alleles in the square like this. Capital B's down this column and lowercase b's down this column. Then we put in the donor's alleles here, lowercase b's all around. So on the left side, we have a capital B followed by a lowercase b, and in the right side, it's lowercase b's all around. The left column results in brown eyes, as brown is a dominant trait to blue, and the right column results in blue eyes because there are 2 recessive genes that match. This means of this specific pairing, there is a 50-50 chance that the kid's eyes will be brown or blue. Now, this is both helpful and not helpful because we don't know Delia or the father's genetic makeup in full. All we know is that Delia has one brown allele. What's even more frustrating is, well, Ash's eyes are brown. And why is that frustrating? Because this is what a Ketchum-Punnett square for eyes would actually look like. It is an absolute wreck. We cannot work backward from this. It also means that we cannot use eyes to eliminate who the father is, because no matter who she paired with, I mean, he was always going to have brown eyes, and there's always a chance he could have blue eyes or green eyes. That we get no information out of this. That did not stop me, however, from calculating the likelihood that our donor would have a certain color of eyes. And it turns out there's a 55% chance, slightly more than 50-50, that Ash's dad has brown eyes, which is good for our motley crew because they all have brown eyes. I also did my math on a whiteboard and just left a 5 divided by 9 equals brown-eyed dad and assumed I would remember what I did to get there, and I did not. I did not. Well, I'm not going to start doubting myself now. I'm sure I'm in the right. Anyway, it doesn't hurt or help our case much because all of our potential mating partners have brown or otherwise dark eyes, so shoot. Well, I guess that means it's time to get the really fun stuff out. That's right, baby. It is time for polygenic Punnett squares. Let the madness begin! You see, Punnett squares are fun, but they're also wrong a not insignificant percentage of the time, and that's because phenotypes, human characteristics, aren't just determined by one gene. Eye color alone is controlled by maybe as few as 8 genes, up to the more common scientific consensus of 16, but it could be as many as 50. 50 genes! That's 100 alleles! Try building a Punnett square for that! Actually... I could do that with the power of Python. Oh, my computer is going to be so mad at me for this. And here we go. Ha! Memory error. I knew it! Time well spent. Anyway, things can get complicated extremely quickly. Just doing 50 genes from 2 parents gave me what, like 100 factorial combinations? Enough to crash my code. So as you can see, I coded something to help me with the next parts because things are about to get extremely tricky. And we are about to eliminate some contestants from this veritable genetics race because we're going to be looking at hair color using not 1, but 2 genes, which alone makes these squares a lot more complicated. Going from 4 possible outcomes from the standard monogenic square, we go up to 16 possibilities because of these various possible outcomes of alleles. First of all, if we took 2 parents with light brown hair and paired them, first you'd have to take all the combinations of alleles from the mom, a b, a lowercase b, lowercase a, big B, and 2 little a b's at the end. Then you do the same for dad. Then you add their values where capital letters are worth 1 point and lowercase letters 0 points. And what you get is this square of results. And what does all this mean? Well, the higher the number, the darker the hair of the child. The lower the number, the lighter the hair color. So from this light brown haired pairing, there is a 6.25% chance of having a child with super dark black hair, a 6.25% chance of having a kid with platinum blonde hair, a 25% chance of blonde, a 37% chance of light brown like the 2 of them, and a 25% chance of dark brown, meaning that 2 parents with light brown hair can produce children with hair all across the color spectrum, but are most likely to produce hair that resembles their own. So let's put in Ash's mom, who has brown hair, or is it red hair? Gosh, it's different everywhere. Okay, let's just make it red or light brown to be safe. That seems pretty consistent with her after all. Ash, meanwhile, has black hair, meaning he's gotta have a 4 in there somewhere, even if it's a slim chance. We know from Celebi, the voice of the forest, where we see a portrayal of young Professor Oak, that he also has brown hair, meaning a pairing between Oak and Delia would have a 12% chance of producing a child with black hair. Meanwhile, Bruno also has black hair and kicks this likelihood up to 25%. But Silver? Ugh, oh boy. Okay, Silver, are you ready? Just have a seat. The results are in, and you are not the father. Silver has very light hair. Even if we presume it's blonde and not platinum blonde, there is a 0% chance that he could have fathered Ash. Period. There's simply not enough potential for melanin between Ash's mom and Silver, so he is gone. So what else could we look at to narrow things down? We could toss a coin. Well, no. There's one more metric we could look at, and that's skin tone, but in order to do skin tone, we're gonna have to make our square bigger. A lot bigger. We're gonna have to up it from a 16 possibility square to a 64 square grid. Yeah, I told you, things get out of control fast, and skin works very similarly to hair and eyes for that matter, and that's that its darkness comes from the amount of melanin in it. And something I noticed that's interesting is that Ash has a slightly darker skin tone than his mom. It's not a ton darker, but he's definitely more olive than she is. And I'm not gonna explain this square to you because it's literally the same as the last one, just bigger, and it has 6 variables instead of 4. I'll put Delia at somewhere light, number 2. Remember, 0 counts as its own number here. Bruno, meanwhile, I'd put somewhat dark, veering on quite dark, but a score of 4. And Oak is a little less dark than Bruno, but definitely darker than Delia is, so we'll make him a 3-pointer, 23 feet 9 inches. Here's the numbers for a Bruno-Delia pairing, and here's the numbers for an Oak-Delia pairing. It is fairly inconclusive, if I'm being honest. They literally both have the exact same chance of producing a medium-skinned child, 38%. And if you collapse them down to their own categories here of just light, medium, and dark, they both have an extremely high chance of producing a kid with medium skin tone, 88%. You know, I think we need to adjust our approach here. We've been trying to work with our candidates and eliminate them, but what we really need to do is produce a profile and gather a little bit more circumstantial evidence in order to figure out who parented Ash. Okay, so let's work from here. I already said there's a 55% chance that the father has brown eyes, so likely brown. The father has a 63% chance, meanwhile, of having very dark hair versus a 33% chance of having just brown hair. And finally, he has a 59% chance of having medium skin with a 33% chance of having very light skin. That's interesting. Now, that's the data. Let's get to the circumstantial evidence. Bruno is very similar in age to Delia, whereas Oak he's quite old, and he has a family, clearly with someone else, and nobody mentions Ash being Gary's uncle? Do I have that right? This is some Dwight Latham and Mo Jaffe stuff, but he is close by. Okay, so I'm prepared to release my findings. Professor Oak I have the results right here. And you are not the father of Ash Ketchum. There's just no way that secret would stay hidden in such a small town. And the timing makes no freaking sense. And given that Delia and Oak in later life both seem to enjoy each other's company quite a bit, like a lot, there's no reason Delia wouldn't have told her son Ash that this guy that everyone likes is his father. Which brings us to you, Bruno. Dark hair, medium dark skin, brown eyes, around Delia's age. Are you prepared, Bruno, for your results? You are not the father? Well, of course you're not the father. You're single, you're hot, you're a freaking good guy, you're an amazing Pokemon trainer, and you are never hanging around Pallet Town. Why would you? And why would Delia hide your identity? Oh, Ash, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that your father is literally one of the best Pokemon trainers in the world. Oh, that's stupid. Then, wait, who could it be then? Someone who had motive and opportunity, who was nearby and fits the profile of someone with darkish hair, brown eyes, and medium skin, and what's more, someone whom Ash's mom would feel was in her son's best interest to keep a secret. Well, there is one. There's a man who does fit this profile, and his name is Giovanni. All the pieces fit. He's an incredibly talented Pokemon trainer, like Delia says of Ash's dad, but she keeps his identity secret because he's a freaking mobster. He runs out of Viridian City, the closest city to Pallet Town, and a place that a young Delia would have definitely spent time in her youth looking for a good time. There's nothing to do in Pallet Town. What's more, he also sends his least dangerous henchmen to keep an eye on Ash 24/7. Like, Ash is never in any real danger from Jesse and James, like ever. Giovanni, the leader of Team Rocket, a man with ambition and skill, turned to the dark side by promise of profit and notoriety, and Ash Ketchum's father. Well, he fits the profile anyway, ticks all the boxes. He's nearby, he's about the right age, has the right physical characteristics, and nothing that's been said about Ash's father would be contradicted by Giovanni's actions in the games or in the anime, so, Nintendo's never gonna tell us who the father actually is, so nobody can ever say that I'm wrong. I love that. What about, Silver, the other Silver, the actual important Silver? Well, I did figure it out. As long as Giovanni paired with a pale blonde woman with blue or green eyes, it's totally plausible to spit out a kid that looks about as different from Ash as could possibly be. So, hope you're ready to step up and start paying child support, Giovanni, because it is freaking time to be a man. Sincerely, Austin. Why does Voltorb blow itself up all the time? Voltorb is an electric-type Pokemon that looks like a Pokeball from the original 151 squad all the way back in Gen 1, and its signature move is blowing itself up right in your face. Why does it do this? How does it do this? Well, we're gonna have to answer both of these questions today separately. Let's start with the first one, the how. Well, the answer to how Voltorb blows itself up is pretty simple, and it's right there in the name of the Pokemon type he is: electricity. Electricity is simply the movement of electrons from one place to another. This encompasses things as simple as you shocking your finger after walking in socks on a carpet and then touching a piece of metal, and things as complicated and dynamic as national power grids. But can you use electricity, this moving of electrons, to cause explosions? Absolutely. But could an animal do it? Maybe? You see, even without socks and carpets, animals are capable of producing electricity. It's actually flowing through you right now, sending signals between all the nerves in your body telling you to do stuff, and it's by using our body's dependence on electrical signals to maintain ourselves that makes it possible for animals like the electric catfish to weaponize electricity in the wild by producing over 350 volts of electricity. They do this using a special organ called an electric organ. Really? Come on, scientists, you can do so much better than that. This organ is highly specialized, and it has little cells called electrocytes that pump out positive sodium and potassium ions, which creates a potential energy difference. When it's time to use that electricity, they open the cells up and bam! Fried fish for dinner. But how do we get from electric fish in the water in real life to exploding Pokeball-looking thing in a video game? Well, we don't, really. I think Voltorb works in a completely completely different way from this, simply because the energy release requirements are far too high for these electric organs to be of much use. Voltorbs are pretty big, they're half a meter wide, which is about the size of a beach ball, which not only makes it hilarious that anybody could ever confuse them for a Pokeball that's meant to fit in your hand, but also, importantly, they are far too small to fit in enough electrocytes into their bodies to make themselves explode using electricity. These things simply take up too much space and are too heavy, so they must be creating this explosion in a totally different way. Gunpowder? No! That's cheating, and that was also Tanya's idea, and you're wrong! No, we can explain how Voltorbs explode easily without cheating and just saying each one is born with a stick of dynamite inside it. And amazingly, the answer is surprisingly simple. Stomach acid. Okay, I might have to explain that one a bit because I don't want y'all walking away from this video thinking either A, that your stomachs are going to spontaneously explode, or B, that you can somehow turn your stomach into a battery. And, you know, just give me a second. Can I turn my stomach into a battery? Oh. No freaking way. Okay, apparently in 2017, Giovanni Traverso, a gastroenterologist and biomedical engineer at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, was able to turn stomachs into batteries and run wireless temperature sensors in the stomachs of pigs for about a week. I wonder if that paper will come in handy later. Well, so I guess you can turn stomachs into batteries, which actually more or less perfectly proves what I'm getting at. You see, this stomach battery thing runs off the same concept as lemon batteries that you may have made before in school. You can stick a galvanized nail over here in a lemon and a piece of copper over here in the same lemon, put a load between them, and bam, you are making electricity. And you're making electricity through a chemical reaction. Two chemical reactions, point of fact. The lemon juice is what's known as an electrolyte in this context, and it's reacting with the metals that are making contact with it. The lemon juice produces electrons on the zinc oxide surface of the galvanized nail and removing electrons from the copper. When you connect the two metals with a wire, you're creating a circuit, and the electrons travel from the electron-rich zinc to the electron-poor copper. This might also be called a short circuit. Keep this part in mind, it's going to become really important later. Now, electric organs are built out of repurposed nerve and muscle cells. Basically, through the convoluted process of evolution, somehow a little chemical battery was formed inside fish completely out of the stuff that was already there. Sodium, potassium, all that stuff is the same stuff your body uses to make you do stuff. Is it possible that Voltorb is using its own evolutionary adaptation to create electricity to explode, but using more powerful components? Maybe. There's a few hints in the various Pokedex entries from the game, specifically these two. The first from Stadium and the second from Crystal.
Usually found in power plants. In some instances, they have been seen drawing power from the trolleys of electric trains. During a study of this Pokemon, it was discovered that its components are not found in nature.
The second one is interesting, mostly because it confirms that some weird stuff is going on inside of Voltorb, but the first is really telling. Voltorbs absorb electricity from electric sources. Why would they do this? Because they have a massive rechargeable battery inside of them instead of a stomach. You see, stomach acid is hydrochloric acid, a potent acid, I might add. The stomach's main job in nature is to break down food into its constituent parts for our bodies so we can absorb the nutrients. But the main job of our nerves and muscles is to send signals to our bodies and make us move and stuff, not create a giant capacitor like electric catfish have. The point is, things can become other things. That's right. I'm suggesting I am suggesting that Voltorb evolved its stomach into a lead-acid battery like cars have. That instead of a stomach, it's got a 12-volt battery just in there. That's why it eats electricity instead of food. Get it? It all works. Just find some lead, toss it in that bad boy, and let the stomach do the rest. What's that? Lead-acid car batteries use sulfuric acid and not hydrochloric acid? And hydrochloric acid would react disastrously with the lead sponge and lead oxide and not let it produce a viable battery? Ah, dang it! Crap! fart! I thought I had a viable theory, but now I have nothing! All that work. What am I supposed to do now? Give up making YouTube videos, I guess. Oh, hey, what's this? Prolonged energy harvesting for ingestible devices. Oh, right! They turn stomachs into batteries! I could kiss you! Mwah! So, it turns out that magnesium and copper work just fine in hydrochloric acid, and they're way less bad for you than lead is. I think that checks out. Voltorbs gave up eating normal food so they could eat magnesium rocks and drain power from power lines. Fantastic! It uses magnesium and copper as cathodes in a hydrochloric acid solution in what used to be its stomach, and that's where it gets its electric powers. But, how does it explode? Well, that part is actually really simple to explain. Now, let's think back to our lemon battery that we made before, which is, frankly, exactly like this, except we're using a different electrolyte, and instead of zinc, we're using magnesium. So, under ordinary use, Voltorb is probably using this electricity to power its basic functions, like moving places, thinking Voltorb thoughts, the usual. It can also weaponize this resource, as they can learn Thunderbolt and Thundershock just from leveling up. How does it do this? Well, it's probably got to get a little clever. You see, one big cell of acid with metals poked in it can't output a ton of power, even if it has a large energy capacity. But if you break up this big stomach sack battery into multiple smaller cells, each with their own cathodes, and arrange them in series, you could dramatically up the potential power output of this system. In fact, this is how electric eels and fish do it too, though their cells are very tiny. This is why such a tiny little organ is capable of outputting over 300 volts though. This is how moves like Thundershock can be used. But explosions? How is that possible? By a short circuit. You see, in this current arrangement, all the electricity is going somewhere. It's either being turned into locomotive energy to move the Voltorb, or it's actually leaving the creature in the form of an attack. But if we shortened this circuit and connected all these things together in one big loop feeding into itself, this moving energy would have nothing to do except get hot. It would be creating heat energy. And as the system gets hotter, the resistance rises in these little bionic cables, because the atoms that make up that system are already vibrating pretty fast. So, as the organ batteries try to output the same current with decreased conductivity, it will get even hotter and hotter. Hot enough to burn the insides of the Voltorb, and burning things creates gas. Hot gas. Hot gases want to expand, but the Voltorb is solid, so the gas has nowhere to go, which increases the pressure. As the heat rises and things begin to rupture, the hydrochloric acid will begin to vaporize too, building the pressure even more. The pressure inside the Voltorb will build and build and build until it can't be contained inside them anymore. The container holding this gas ruptures, sending hot gas and debris flying in all directions. In other words, Voltorb explodes. And this runaway chain reaction can happen really quickly, like I'm talking seconds. Internal short circuits are one of the major causes of batteries exploding, and it can happen in no time at all because electricity is that powerful. And keep this in mind, hand grenades have about 1/4 of a megajoule of energy inside them, while motorcycle batteries have over 4 times that. These runaway cascading energy events can get really dangerous really quickly. At least that's my theory for how Voltorb explodes. Maybe they just go around eating dynamite all day for all I know. But I really like this weaponized internal short circuit idea. Now we get to the really interesting part. The why. Why are they exploding? It's ridiculous, right? In fact, I was ready to end this episode right here, throw down a bombastic, this makes no freaking sense, Game Freak and or Nintendo, but let me tell you, friend, that this strategy, it makes perfect sense. And when I found out why, it blew my freaking mind. When you encounter Voltorbs in the wild, they know 4 moves, 3 things that I don't really care about, and self-destruct. Now, I believe wild Pokemon AI is pretty dumb, at least in the early games. They would just pick a move at random and that's what they would do. So, you essentially had a 25% chance of having your Pokemon blown to smithereens when you encountered one of these things. Why do they do this? No animal in our world or the next blows themselves up completely while under threat. We have possums that play dead, lots of animals that play dead actually, but nothing that blows themselves up. Or that's what I thought, until I discovered the pea aphid. Originating in Southeast Asia, pea aphids, when under threat, will explode their freaking heads or split open their own bodies as a defense mechanism, which you may be thinking like I did, defense? Against what? What are you defending against if you're dead? And that is a good question, and is probably the first thing that comes to your mind if you're a highly individualistic species like humans are. But aphids use their tiny brains to think just a little bit smarter. You see, when pea aphids explode, they send poison flying everywhere. It gets all over whatever was attacking them, often ladybugs or some species of ants. Poison that either kills the predator outright or thoroughly ruins their appetite. And you know what dead predators don't do? Hunt and eat your friends. Somehow, throughout the course of evolution, aphids figured out that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or in this case, the evolutionary fitness of the many outweighs mine. Therefore, I'm gonna do what I can to make sure our general colony is more safe. An aphid is, let me just look at it. It's cute, but it's helpless. One that's under attack is probably dead anyway. But by discouraging predators or even taking some of them off the board entirely, they make sure that their entire family survives. And tell me that this behavior doesn't map perfectly onto Voltorbs. For one, you encounter them in a pretty out-of-the-way spot, and there's a bunch of them there. Realistically, I mean, like realistically, if you were walking through a building and some beach ball looking thing rolled in front of you and you're like, Geodude, attack! That thing knows it's probably going to die. I mean, faint, but we know what faint means in Pokemon. It's just like going to that little happy farm in the countryside if you don't have a trainer to take you to a Poke Center, so you're gonna die. So, what do? Act like Nidorans and cower in fear and await your demise? No! You blow yourself up like a freaking hand grenade. Tell me, you as a person, if you saw a sentient creature blow itself up, spraying hot organs and hydrochloric acid vapor and fluids all over the place, obliterating your Pokemon and probably causing you some degree of serious injury, would you go further into that building, or would you, like me, do everything in your power for the rest of your life to avoid anything even vaguely ball-shaped and pray you never come across one ever again? The second one, I bet. That's a smart move. So Voltorbs evolved to have battery cells instead of stomachs, eat magnesium, and recharge their reserves by draining electricity and blow themselves to smithereens, sending poke shrapnel and hot stomach acid flying all over the room, all because somehow all of them learned the lesson that took Spock like 30 years to teach Captain Kirk. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Or the one. Sincerely, Austin. We have so much to get through today, from DNA sequencing to computer compression algorithms and economy-crushing dollar values, and my first pass at this video was over 25 minutes long, so let's just skip the shenanigans and get started. How on earth does the Pokemon PC storage work? In order to begin even answering the PC storage system problem, we are going to have to agree to some ground rules, because otherwise this isn't going to be a single video. It'd be a running series of videos and a brand new show called Austin Spends 2 Years of His Life Overthinking Pokemon. Okay, so number one is we're not going to touch on precisely how Pokeballs, catching Pokemon, and releasing them from the Pokeballs works. I might have some jokes at the end about this, but that's well outside the scope of this video. Number two, because every iteration of the Pokemon storage and transportation system is called a PC, we will be assuming that the storage system is a computer, since in Japan it's called, well, the personal computer. It looks like a computer, and it is obviously a computer, and in several versions it has stuff like email in it. It is a computer. Just look at it. I bring this up because, in all honesty, the simple answer I had originally was just, hey, the computer is just the interface. You put your Pokeball in the hole and it sucks it up like one of those bank teller tube things things and deposits the ball in some central storage facility in the middle of the region, which, yeah, would be awesome, but that is not what we're here to talk about today. So, first of all, what is a Pokemon? A Pokemon is essentially an animal, just like you, me, my cat, my dog. They have magic powers, which is a bit weird, but we're gonna be mostly ignoring that for now. So, what is an animal? Well, an animal is a collection of organs that are fused together into a specific arrangement. And what are organs? They're a collection of cells that individually perform very specific tiny functions that all add together into a very complex set of functions that are all bound together with glycocalyx intercellular cell adhesion molecules. A cell is the basic building block of life as we know it on this planet. There's a lot going on inside a cell, but the main important part we need from it right now is DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. This is the stuff we are really after because it contains everything that makes an animal itself. DNA is a complex, long molecule composed of a long double helical chain made of smaller sections called nucleotides, all strung together in a row and in pairs. And these pairs are called base pairs. And here I'm in a bit of a pickle. This script got really long because I went into a comprehensive dive about how to store DNA, cell data, and the brain. And here's the problem. DNA, it takes up almost no space on a hard drive, seriously. At its biggest estimate, it's about 6 gig for the human genome if you store it in 8-bit characters. But in a proprietary storage format, you could use as little as 1.5 if it used 4 bits per base pair, of which there's 3 billion in the human genome. It would use 4 bits because 4 bits in binary lets you cover all 16 combinations of G, T, A, and C, the 4 different nucleotides that make up base pairs. It's all incredibly cool science, but if I'm being honest, the storage requirements barely make a dent in our storage needs. DNA is just really easy to store as data. That's it. I did, however, leave a link to my cut sections from the video that are mostly contextless, so you can give them a read if you want, because it's still really neat stuff. All right. So, 1.5 to 6 gig to store DNA, and now it is time to get to the really hard stuff. So, we've accounted for the basic instructional code that our Pokemon cells are going to need, DNA, but let's zoom out again on that what makes an animal thing. Organs, which are made out of cells. See, DNA can't account for me getting sick for 2 weeks and losing 5 pounds, nor can it account for a Machoke hitting the gym, or heck, getting a broken arm or an amputation, or years and years of education, which we will get to later. No! Our cells are important parts of our bodies that change dynamically based on our experiences and our choices. And so when you store that EV-trained Skiddo in the PC, if all you're storing is the DNA, the only thing that's gonna plop out when you come back to get it is a generic wild Skiddo with no EV points. You need those muscles to show, which means we're gonna need to store that information too. This is a bit trickier to quantify. See, DNA actually is information, so it's easier to be like, this is a bit and a byte or whatever. All the cells in your body, though, I struggled with that one for quite a bit. Quite a bit! I didn't even think about that. But I think I came up with a pretty solid method for finding the amount of storage you would need. Fermi estimation. We've gone over Fermi estimation before, but it's a way to get ballpark estimates that get you pretty close to a real answer based on limited information. It's named after Enrico Fermi, who used falling sheets of paper during atomic bomb tests to estimate blast yields. The general idea is that if you have some information to go off of and you make enough estimates, your overestimates and underestimates will kinda average each other out and you'll get within the ballpark of the right answer. Fermi estimated that a 21 kiloton bomb was 10 kilotons from those sheets of paper, which is either a terrible estimate or an amazing one, depending upon how you look at it. If I'm off by half in this case, I think I'm going to consider it a win. So the human body, actually, let's use a human-like Pokemon. Machoke is pretty close, peak Himbo maybe, but anyway, the human Machoke body has 30 trillion cells in it. Let's double that, 60 trillion. Double it again, there we go, I feel good about that. 120 trillion. Let's say it takes 120 trillion bytes to store cell data. data. That may not all be individual cells, it could be groups of similar cells. If it's a simple enough system like muscles or bones, that amounts to 120 terabytes. Oof. That is slightly worse than the 1.5 gig. See why I ended up skipping DNA? This is not going to fit onto a thumb drive at the time this video is coming out. But I'm sorry to disappoint you, Yugi. You've activated my trap card. Computer science and data compression. So data compression is absolutely incredible, and even after reading about it for days and trying my hand at it manually, and that's right, you heard me, manually, I've learned to appreciate data compression a lot. Not for the computer chicanery I thought it was, but for the mathematical and processing genius that it actually is. You see, cells in your body, and DNA too, are perfect candidates for data compression, especially DNA. We're gonna go over the basics of how data compression works, not the actual algorithms themselves, so you can get a sense for how powerful and not magical it actually is. Data compression looks for repeating patterns and makes them shorter. Take this sentence for example. I took a quick pass at it and compressed it from 206 characters down to 134 using a series of replacements that will reference a library of patterns that match to the points upon decompression and put those patterns back in. Of course, the library takes up space too, so all said and done, I only compressed it by 10.7%, but that's not bad for a non-computer. And the fact of the matter is, short little sentences like this are generally very difficult to compress by very much at all. But longer sequences, like sequences that are filled with a lot more characters, they have a lot more patterns to find. And bodies have a lot of patterns. You got muscle cells repeating over and over down your arm until they reach your elbow. It's all patterns. In fact, just like human development is one big pattern repeating itself. That's what growth is. Oh, we need more bones. Hit that button that makes the bone 3D printer go. And DNA is filled with patterns. There's only 4 different molecules to work with, and a lot of them are highly predictable, especially within the same species. An algorithm designed specifically to compress DNA data could be made easily by people way smarter than me, in all honesty. And the best part about these compression methods is that they are totally lossless, which means you lose no information at all. This is opposed to compressions like JPEG and MP3, and even this video that you're watching, which was uploaded as an MP4, where a little bit of data is always lost and can't ever be gotten back. However, this is not the type of compression you want to use for things like DNA and cell information because it will lead to mistakes. Like, what's just aberrations and artifacts in a JPEG around the edges? Yeah, that's cancer. That's your pancreas not doing whatever a pancreas does. That's your eyeballs being filled with stomach acid instead of aqueous humor. So, yeah, there's no taking this 120 terabytes and 1.5 gig down to like 20 gigabytes or something, but we can do pretty darn good regardless. As far as DNA data goes, I actually wrote a quick little script in Python that was meant to generate sample DNA code to use for demonstrative purposes, and it's probably the worst thing I've ever written. Okay, no, the Bulbasaur thing is the worst thing I've ever written, but it took like hours and hours. Probably should have used a string append or something to avoid so many write commands. Oh well! Anyway, it broke at about 2.79 gigabytes, which at UTF 8-bit encoding of 1 byte per character gives us about 1.4 billion base pairs, less than half my target, but it'll suit its purpose, which is to illustrate just how well even random DNA-like text can be compressed without losing a single thing. I did a few basic compressions, and none did better than WinRAR compressing into the RAR format. I'm sure some super pro level stuff could have done better, but even this basic tool was able to take this 2.79 gig and compress it down to 740 megabytes. That's over 74% compression. You must be saying to yourself, there must be a trade-off. If compressing is so efficient for storage, why isn't everything compressed losslessly? And the answer to that question is actually pretty easy. There is a cost, and the cost is processing time. This file took about 3 minutes to compress and 2 minutes and 44 seconds to decompress. That adds 5 minutes, almost 6, to anything you want to do to it, like open it and read its contents. That is the cost, the trade-off. All magic comes with a price. In any case, taking this same compression ratio and using it on our DNA and cell and organ data, we can take this 120 terabytes and squash it down all the way to just 30 terabytes. terabytes. All right, so there, we did it. 30-ish terabytes for your average Pokemon. Are we done yet? Not even close! Because we left out the most important part of the equation, the brain. Sure, you can argue that the cell data was enough to track this, but I don't think so, not by a long shot. Even rudimentary brains are still some of the most powerful singular computing systems on the entire planet. And while we don't have to emulate the processing power of a brain in the computer, we do have to save the memories, skills, and experiences of a Pokemon perfectly. Modern estimates put the Machoke brain at about 1 petabyte of storage capacity. That is astronomical. That is 1,000 terabytes. That means even with 74% compression, heck, even with 80% compression, you're looking at 200 terabytes, plus the 30 from the cell and tissue data, plus 360 meg of the DNA. You're looking at conservatively bare minimum 230 terabytes and 360 meg required to store a single Pokemon. And that's just like a dumb one like Machoke. Does it get worse than that? Oh yeah! It gets a lot worse. Because some genius at Game Freak wrote down that Alakazams, the final evolved form of Abra, have an IQ of 5,000, making them 50 times more brain smart than the average Himbo human or Machoke. This boosts the brain storage requirement to 10,030 terabytes and 360-ish megabytes. That's 10 petabytes compressed. That much has to be available for one Pokemon. One! It'd take the world's fastest ever recorded data transfer speed of 319 terabytes per second over 5 minutes to upload this bad boy. And on top of it, there's 240 slots available in Gen 1 alone, and all the way up to 1,000 in games like Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu, meaning that these boxes, these PCs, they have to be capable of storing anywhere between 2,000 and 400 petabytes to over 10,000, even with data compressed. That's 10 exabytes, which is approximately 0.4% of the entire storage capacity available in the world in 2021, which is estimated to be about 2,200 to 2,300 exabytes. This is for one person that has to be available. It gets worse when you consider an entire world of Pokemon trainers. Generation 1 alone sold 46 million copies. If, conservatively, they had enough storage space for all those people to fill their boxes with Alakazams, which is likely an underestimate considering the population of the world in 1997 was 5.8 billion and the entire world economy seems to center around Pokemon. If all these players filled their boxes with compressed Alakazams, the PC data center would have needed over 110 million exabytes of storage space, which at $100 per gigabyte, which was the going rate for storage in 1997, would have cost over $11 quintillion to build. In 1997 money, that's 19 quintillion bucks today. If you add up all the people who bought all the games, you get 220 million, and with their associated box sizes, you get a total storage for all the boxes ever made, all filled with Alakazams, of 1.3 billion exabytes of storage needed to store at maximum capacity, all of which has to be available on a dime. That's so much storage required that we don't even have a word for it yet. It's 1,311 yottabytes, and the term for 1,000 yottabytes has two proposed names, Hellabyte and Brontobyte. I'm personally a fan of Hellabyte because it's a hella of a lot of bytes. It's definitely more storage than I will ever see in my lifetime. I might live to see a petabyte hard drive in my home. In the modern day, to store one normal Pokemon, a Machoke, it would take 12 Western Digital 20 terabyte MyBook Duo desktop RAID external hard drives to store, and it would cost you just shy of $9,000. That's the cheapest, but if you're using a data center, which values the terabyte on average at about $750, you're looking at more like $172.5 thousand per Machoke. These values skyrocket to $376.4 thousand to $7.5 million for an Alakazam. For one, a full box of Gen 1 is between 90 million to 1.8 billion. Raise that to 7.5 billion if you can store 1,000 like in the Let's Go games. The cost of being able to store the worst case scenario number of Pokemon, that 1.3 hellabytes from all the games, that'd be $983 quadrillion, which is cheaper than the storage costs of Gen 1 alone in 1997. Why is that? Well, it's because storage prices have dropped by a lot since 1997. This is still way more money than exists in the entire entire world right now, like period. End of story. And all of this ignores how on earth you convert a Pokemon into storable data anyway. Is this what Pokeballs are doing? Is that why it's so hard? They're trying to tear Pokemon apart at a molecular level to get their genetic information and count their cells, unravel their brain to store it all in some sort of compressed format, and then at launch decompress it all again? That is a really dark interpretation for why the powerful Pokemon are much more difficult to catch. They're harder to decode and read the data from, and the process of ripping their cells apart and then putting them back together again, just, you're not going to convince me that that does not hurt. They're in the Pokeball for seconds, not milliseconds. They probably feel all of that. Every cell in their body being ripped free and scanned so it can be stored in the giant freaking hard drive that's somewhere in there. That's gonna be a yikes for me, dog. Sincerely, Austin. Oh my god, I made it. Oh, I've been so sick the past 2 weeks. I made it through this video, barely. Oh my god, I'm so tired. And because I made it here, I have to thank my high-tier patrons who make this show possible. Those people are gonna be Juan Santa Maria, Mad Lad 616, Miss Kendra, Ronald Coleman, Adeline Hager, Zadadam TP, Nicholas Bellinger, Marissa Resnick, Nick Patterson, and Loretta Mazer. Oh, I made it. Holy cow. Oh, don't have kids unless you're ready to get really sick in wintertime and fall time. Because woof. Wasn't even COVID. Just kicked my butt.